In this video, we're breaking down 2 hours of the craziest Family Guy fan theories. Let's get started. First up, we got Stewie's fake British accent. For nearly 2 decades, Family Guy fans accepted one simple fact. Stewie Griffin, the diabolical baby genius, spoke with a posh British accent. It was just part of who he was: sophisticated, refined, and utterly different from his blue-collar Rhode Island family. Peter sounded like he'd never left Quahog. Lois had that typical New England tone. Chris and Meg, pure American teenagers. But Stewie, he talked like he'd been raised in a manor house in the English countryside, sipping tea with the Queen. Then, in March 2018, everything changed. Season 16, Episode 12, titled "Send in Stewie, Please," dropped a bombshell that made fans question everything they thought they knew about the show's most iconic character. The episode revealed something shocking. Stewie's British accent is completely, totally, 100% fake. He made it up, the whole thing. For 19 years, Stewie Griffin had been lying to everyone, including the audience. The episode that changed everything, Send in Stewie, Please, aired on the 18th of March 2018 during Family Guy's 16th season. The episode was different from typical Family Guy fare. Instead of the usual chaotic adventures and cutaway gags, this was an intimate, dialogue-heavy episode featuring only 2 characters, Stewie Griffin and his therapist, Dr. Cornelius Pritchfield, voiced by legendary actor Sir Ian McKellen. The setup was simple. Stewie had pushed a classmate named Tyler down the stairs at preschool. As punishment, he was sent to see Dr. Pritchfield, a British child psychologist. The entire episode takes place in the therapist's office, with Stewie sitting on the couch, talking about his feelings, his insecurities, and his place in the world. For Family Guy, a show known for rapid-fire jokes, pop culture references, and absurdist humor, this was a radical departure. The episode ran without commercial breaks, giving it a theatrical, uninterrupted feel. It was quieter, more introspective, and ultimately more revealing than almost any episode the show had ever produced. The big reveal: I don't hear a difference. The moment came partway through the therapy session. Dr. Pritchfield, who speaks with an authentic British accent, makes an observation that catches Stewie completely off guard. The therapist points out something peculiar. Despite Stewie's attempt to sound British, his accent isn't quite right. It's not authentic. Stewie, defensive and vulnerable, insists his accent is real. But Dr. Pritchfield, with the calm professionalism of someone who has seen through countless facades, delivers the truth gently but firmly. I don't hear a difference between Stewie's accent and an American one. Stewie is stunned. He's been performing this accent for his entire life, or at least, for the entire run of the show. And the first person he meets with a genuine British accent immediately recognizes it as fake. The jig is up. The therapist doesn't shame Stewie for this revelation. Instead, he approaches it with understanding. He recognizes what Stewie has been doing, creating a protective identity, a persona that makes him feel special and different from everyone else. It's a coping mechanism, a way for a baby who feels fundamentally out of place to carve out his own unique identity. Why would Stewie fake his accent? The episode doesn't just expose the fake accent, it explains why Stewie created it in the first place. Throughout the therapy session, Stewie opens up about feeling like he doesn't fit in. He's a baby with the mind of an adult genius. He's smarter than everyone around him. He's more sophisticated, more cultured, more aware of the world than any infant has a right to be. But being different is isolating. Stewie exists in a strange liminal space, too young to be taken seriously by adults, too intellectually advanced to relate to other children. He's stuck in a 1-year-old's body, with ambitions, desires, and thoughts that would challenge most grown-ups. So he invented the accent, not consciously perhaps, but as a psychological defense mechanism. By speaking with a British accent, a way of speaking that Americans often associate with intelligence, sophistication, and class, Stewie created a verbal suit of armor. The accent became his way of saying, "I'm not like the rest of you. I'm special. I'm different. I'm better." Writer Gary Janetti, who penned the episode, explained the reasoning in an interview with TV Line shortly after the episode aired. Janetti said, "I liked the idea of that being the reveal. It felt truthful that somebody who didn't feel like he fit in would create an artificial personality. To an extent, that's what he's done," Janetti continued. And then to have Ian's character, the one person he's sharing this big secret with, not even hear the difference, was another fun opportunity. It felt like a good way to show Stewie's insecurities in a way that felt truthful to the history of the series. The writers always knew. What makes this revelation even more interesting is that the show's creators and writers had always known the truth. Seth MacFarlane, who created Family Guy and voices Stewie, along with Peter, Brian, and several other characters, based Stewie's voice on the English actor Rex Harrison, particularly his performance in the 1964 musical film My Fair Lady. But MacFarlane never intended for Stewie to actually be British. From the very beginning, Stewie was an American baby from Rhode Island who happened to speak with an affected British accent. The question was never, is Stewie British? It was, why does this American baby talk like he's British? For 16 seasons, the show dropped hints. Peter and Lois both have distinctly American accents. There's never been any mention of British relatives or Stewie spending time in England as an infant. The show has established, multiple times, that the Griffin family is thoroughly American, with deep roots in Rhode Island. Peter's ancestors include Nate Griffin, a slave, and various other thoroughly American characters. Lois comes from the wealthy Pewterschmidt family who built their fortune in America. Yet somehow, Stewie developed this accent that sounds nothing like his parents or siblings. The show never explicitly addressed this paradox until Send In Stewie, Please finally revealed the truth that the writers had known all along. Fan reactions, shock, acceptance, and debate. When the episode aired, it sparked immediate discussion across social media, fan forums, and entertainment websites. Some fans were shocked, others felt vindicated, claiming they'd suspected the truth all along. Many praised the show for taking a risk with such an unusual, introspective episode. On Twitter, fans debated the implications. If Stewie's accent is fake, does that mean everything else about his character is a construct too? Is his genius real? His evil plans? His relationship with Brian? Some fans argued that the fake accent made Stewie even more interesting, a character so insecure that he's been performing a false identity for the entire series. Entertainment websites quickly picked up the story. Deadline ran an article with the headline, "Family Guy addresses Stewie's sexuality, his accent, and more." The Washington Blade covered the episode, focusing on both the accent revelation and Stewie's comments about his sexuality. Screen Rant published a piece titled, "Family Guy Reveals Stewie's Real Voice and Sexuality," calling the episode a special episode of Seth MacFarlane's Family Guy. Critics had mixed reactions to the episode itself. Some praised it for its ambition and emotional depth. Others found it slow and talky, missing the rapid-fire humor that typically defines Family Guy. But almost everyone agreed that the accent revelation was a significant moment for the series, a genuine character development that recontextualized 19 years of storytelling. The broader context, Stewie's ongoing identity crisis. The fake accent wasn't the only revelation in Send In Stewie, Please. The episode also addressed Stewie's sexuality, another long-running question mark in the series. Throughout the show's run, Stewie has exhibited behavior that suggests he might be gay, bisexual, or sexually fluid. He's made comments about attractive men, had romantic fantasies involving both male and female characters, and generally defied easy categorization. In the therapy session, Stewie addresses this directly. He tells Dr. Pritchfield, "I'm not gay. This whole thing isn't because I'm gay, so calm down. I can already see you licking your chops. I'm sure you live for the coming out sessions. If anything, I'm less gay than I used to be." But then he adds, almost as an aside, "But do I think that Grant Gustin and I would make the most adorable Instagram couple? Yes, we would." The episode treats Stewie's sexuality with the same ambiguity as his accent, acknowledging the questions without providing definitive answers. Writer Gary Janetti explained this choice in his interview with TV Line. Stewie's awareness of his sexuality is this uncertain thing, and that needs to stay as it is. His uncertainty gives him a vulnerability, which is something we need to maintain for the series. Whether he is gay or not, that isn't going to be answered when he's a 1-year-old. Executive producer Rich Appel added, "He's still a baby. He doesn't know yet, and sexuality is a very fluid matter. It's better to keep that as something that's not determined yet." The fake accent fits into this broader pattern. Stewie is a character defined by uncertainty and performance. He doesn't know who he is yet, so he tries on different identities: the British intellectual, the evil genius, the misunderstood artist. The accent is just one piece of a larger puzzle that Stewie himself is still trying to solve. The question everyone asks, so, what's his real voice? Here's where things get interesting. The episode reveals that Stewie's British accent is fake, but it doesn't actually show us what his real voice sounds like. Throughout the therapy session, Stewie continues speaking in his familiar British accented voice. Dr. Pritchfield's comment, "I don't hear a difference," suggests that to a trained ear, Stewie's attempt at a British accent just sounds like a regular American accent with pretensions. This creates an interpretive puzzle. Does Stewie actually believe his accent sounds British, even though it doesn't? Or does he know it's fake but commit to the performance anyway? The episode leaves this ambiguous, which some fans found frustrating, but others appreciated as psychologically realistic. In real life, Seth MacFarlane voices Stewie using his regular speaking voice but with an affected, theatrical delivery inspired by Rex Harrison. MacFarlane doesn't actually do a separate British accent voice for Stewie. He does an impression of what an American doing a theatrical, vaguely British-sounding voice would sound like. In other words, Stewie's voice has always been, on a technical level, an American pretending to sound British. This metatextual layer adds another dimension to the revelation. The audience has been hearing Stewie's fake accent all along, performed by an American voice actor, and accepting it as British because the character presents it that way. The episode forces viewers to reconsider what they've been hearing for nearly 2 decades. The Rex Harrison connection. To understand Stewie's voice, you have to understand Rex Harrison. Born in England in 1908, Harrison was a distinguished stage and film actor who became most famous for his role as Professor Henry Higgins in My Fair Lady, both on Broadway and in the 1964 film adaptation. In My Fair Lady, Harrison played a phonetics professor who teaches a working-class flower girl, Eliza Doolittle, to speak with an upper-class British accent. The role required Harrison to deliver his lines in a distinctive manner, not quite singing, not quite speaking, but a rhythmic, musical speaking style that became his trademark. Harrison's voice had a precise, clipped quality. He articulated every syllable with theatrical precision. His delivery was commanding, intelligent, and slightly condescending, exactly the qualities Seth MacFarlane wanted for Stewie Griffin. When MacFarlane created Stewie, he explicitly modeled the character's voice on Rex Harrison's performance in My Fair Lady. MacFarlane has discussed this in interviews and DVD commentaries. He wanted Stewie to sound sophisticated and villainous, with a theatrical flair that would make the character funny and memorable. The ironic connection to My Fair Lady is hard to ignore. In that story, Eliza Doolittle learns to fake an upper-class accent to fool society. In Family Guy, Stewie fakes a British accent to create a false identity. Both are stories about linguistic performance and the ways people use speech to construct their social identities. The psychological truth behind the accent, what makes the fake accent revelation work both dramatically and comedically, is that it's psychologically plausible. Real people, especially children and adolescents struggling with identity issues, absolutely do adopt fake accents as a coping mechanism. Psychologists call this code switching or linguistic accommodation, changing the way you speak based on social context. Usually, this means adopting different speech patterns in different settings, speaking more formally at work than with friends, for example. But in some cases, people adopt entirely new accents as a way of reinventing themselves. This is especially common among people who feel marginalized, different, or out of place. Adopting a new way of speaking becomes a way of signaling, "I'm not like everyone else, I'm special." For someone like Stewie, isolated by his intelligence, trapped in a baby's body, surrounded by a family he sees as beneath him, intellectually creating a sophisticated British persona makes perfect sense. Child psychologists recognize this kind of behavior as a defense mechanism. When children feel powerless or unrecognized, they sometimes create elaborate fantasies about themselves. They might pretend to be royalty, or to have special powers, or to come from somewhere exotic and far away. Stewie's fake accent is a linguistic version of this common childhood behavior, taken to an extreme. The episode treats this seriously, even as it plays it for comedy. Dr. Pritchfield doesn't mock Stewie for the fake accent. He recognizes it for what it is, a hurt child's attempt to feel special and valued in a world that doesn't seem to understand him. How this changes everything and nothing. So what does this revelation mean for the show? In some ways, everything. In other ways, nothing. On one level, knowing Stewie's accent is fake reframes every episode that came before. Every time Stewie spoke in that distinctive voice, he was performing. Every interaction with his family, every conversation with Brian, every evil monologue, all of it was Stewie in character, playing the role of the British genius baby. This adds a layer of tragedy to the character. Stewie isn't just isolated by his intelligence and his age, he's also imprisoned by a false identity he created for himself. He can't drop the act because the act has become who he is. The accent has become so ingrained that even he might not remember what he sounded like before he started faking it. On another level, nothing really changes. The show doesn't suddenly have Stewie speaking in a different voice. He continues using the same British accented speech in every subsequent episode. The writers don't constantly reference the fake accent or make it a running gag. It was revealed, acknowledged, and then the show moved on. This is very much in keeping with Family Guy's approach to continuity. The show has always played fast and loose with its own history, contradicting itself, ignoring past revelations, and treating each episode as somewhat independent. Send in Stewie, Please offered a moment of genuine character development and psychological insight, but it didn't fundamentally alter the show's format or tone. The bigger picture, Family Guy's relationship with character development. Send in Stewie, Please represents something unusual in Family Guy's history. Genuine character development handled with sensitivity and emotional intelligence. This is a show better known for shock humor, pop culture parodies, and characters who rarely learn or grow. Peter Griffin remains an idiot. Lois continues to be both long-suffering and occasionally cruel. Brian stays pretentious and self-deluded. Meg is still the family punching bag. The characters exist in a kind of sitcom stasis, resetting to their default positions at the end of most episodes. But Stewie has always been different. From the beginning, Stewie has been the show's most dynamic character. He started as a genuinely evil villain bent on matricide and world domination. Over time, he evolved into something more complex, still intelligent and occasionally cruel, but also capable of genuine affection, especially toward Brian. The relationship between Stewie and Brian has become the emotional heart of the show. Their Road to episodes, Road to Rhode Island, Road to the Multiverse, Road to Germany, are consistently among the series' most acclaimed. These episodes pair the two characters in adventures that showcase their friendship and mutual dependency. Revealing Stewie's fake accent fits into this pattern of gradual character development. It doesn't contradict what we know about Stewie, it deepens it. It adds vulnerability to a character who often presents himself as invulnerable. It reminds us that beneath the genius, beneath the confidence, beneath the accent, Stewie is still just a baby, trying to figure out who he is. The creative decision, why reveal it now? Why did the writers choose to reveal the fake accent in season 16 after 19 years? The answer likely involves multiple factors. First, the show had been hinting at Stewie's identity issues for years. His sexuality, his relationship with his mother, his oscillation between villain and vulnerable child, all of these elements had been building. The fake accent revelation provided a unifying explanation for many of these threads. Second, Family Guy has always been willing to experiment with format and structure. The show has done musical episodes, anthology episodes, episodes told in different animation styles, and episodes that parody specific movies or TV shows. An intimate two-character therapy session fit this tradition of occasional experimentation. Third, having Sir Ian McKellen available to voice the therapist provided the perfect opportunity. McKellen, a legendary British actor, brought gravitas and authenticity to the role. His genuine British accent made the perfect contrast to Stewie's fake one, and McKellen's status as a LGBTQ+ icon added resonance to the episode's subplot about Stewie's sexuality. Finally, 19 years into a show's run, writers need to find new territory to explore. The fake accent revelation gave Family Guy something fresh to say about one of its core characters, a genuine surprise that also made emotional and psychological sense. The wider cultural impact. Send in Stewie, Please became one of the most discussed Family Guy episodes in years. It sparked articles, think pieces, and social media debates. Entertainment Weekly, The Hollywood Reporter, TV Line, Deadline, and numerous other outlets covered the episode. The accent revelation, combined with Stewie's comments about his sexuality, made the episode feel culturally significant. It wasn't just a funny cartoon, it was a cartoon tackling questions of identity, performance, and self-discovery. Some critics drew parallels to other shows that had recently addressed similar themes. BoJack Horseman had been exploring depression and self-destructive behavior through the lens of an animated comedy. Steven Universe was telling stories about gender, identity, and belonging aimed at children and adults alike. Bob's Burgers was showing that animated sitcoms could be both funny and genuinely heartfelt. Send in Stewie, Please positioned Family Guy, often dismissed as lowbrow or offensive, as capable of surprising depth and emotional intelligence. It didn't make the show a different kind of program. Family Guy returned to its usual chaos the very next week, but it demonstrated that even a show built on shock humor and pop culture references could pause for moments of genuine character exploration. The legacy, a footnote, or a turning point. 3 years after Send in Stewie, Please aired, how significant does the fake accent revelation seem? The answer depends on how you look at it. For casual viewers who dip in and out of Family Guy, the episode might barely register. Stewie still sounds the same. The show hasn't radically changed. Most episodes don't reference or build on the revelation. For dedicated fans and analysts of the show, however, the episode represents something important. It's a rare moment when Family Guy acknowledged its own history and its characters' psychological complexity. It demonstrated that the show's creators understand Stewie as more than just a source of jokes. They see him as a fully realized character with depth and vulnerability. It also set a precedent. If the show could take one episode to seriously explore Stewie's identity, it could potentially do the same for other characters. Not every episode needs to be introspective or serious, but knowing the show is capable of that depth enriches everything else. Most importantly, the fake accent revelation adds a new layer of meaning to every Stewie moment. Now, when we hear him speak in that distinctive voice, we know we're hearing a performance Stewie's ongoing, exhausting attempt to be someone other than who he fears he really is. That knowledge makes the character richer, funnier, and ultimately more human. After 19 years, Family Guy finally told the truth. Stewie Griffin, the brilliant baby with the British accent, has been faking it all along, and somehow, that makes him more real than ever. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we have the Stewie is sexually fluid theory. Not gay, not straight. Stewie's sexuality, the question Family Guy refuses to answer. For over 2 decades, Family Guy has dropped hints, made jokes, and teased viewers about one of television's most persistent questions. Is Stewie Griffin gay? The answer, it turns out, is both simpler and more complicated than anyone expected. In March 2018, the show finally addressed the question directly, and the answer was essentially, maybe, maybe not. It's complicated, and he's only 1 year old, so let's not worry about it too much. This non-answer answer is deliberate, intentional, and, according to the show's creator and writers, the only honest way to handle the sexuality of a cartoon baby who talks like an adult but exists in the body and developmental stage of an infant. The episode that addressed everything while answering nothing. On the 18th of March 2018, Family Guy aired Send in Stewie, Please, an episode unlike almost anything the show had done before. The entire episode consisted of Stewie sitting in a therapist's office, talking to Dr. Cornelius Pritchfield, voiced by Sir Ian McKellen, the legendary British actor known for playing Gandalf in The Lord of the Rings and Magneto in the X-Men films. McKellen himself is openly gay and has been a prominent LGBTQ+ advocate for decades, making his casting in this particular episode especially meaningful. His presence signaled that the show was taking this topic seriously, even as it maintained Family Guy's characteristic humor. The setup was straightforward. Stewie had pushed another student, Tyler, down the stairs at preschool. As punishment, he was sent to see Dr. Pritchfield for a therapy session. What follows is 22 minutes of conversation between Stewie and the therapist, with no commercial breaks, no cutaway gags, and no other characters appearing except for brief moments at the beginning and end. During the session, Stewie opens up about why he pushed Tyler, and what he says is revealing. I only pushed Tyler down the stairs because I like him, and I'm afraid he won't like me back, and not like him. Then, almost immediately, Stewie gets defensive. He quickly clarifies, addressing the therapist directly, I'm not gay. This whole thing isn't because I'm gay, so calm down. I can already see you licking your chops. I'm sure you live for the coming out sessions. It's a fascinating moment of self-awareness and deflection. Stewie recognizes that Dr. Pritchfield might be expecting a coming out story. He pushes back against that expectation, but then, in the very next breath, he continues, "If anything, I'm less gay than I used to be. Not that anybody at this school would care." And then comes the kicker, "But do I think that Grant Gustin and I would make the most adorable Instagram couple? Yes, we would." Grant Gustin is the actor who plays The Flash on the CW television network. Stewie even explains this to the therapist, noting, "Grant Gustin plays The Flash on the CW, if you were wondering, because, most people over 70 probably don't know who he is. Think young Anthony Perkins." Later in the episode, Stewie uses another term to describe himself. He mentions that he's heard the word fluid being used to describe sexuality. He says, somewhat uncertainly, "Anyway, fluid is something I hear being tossed around, but I'm confident in my heterosexuality. That's a word, right?" When Dr. Pritchfield confirms that yes, heterosexual is indeed a word, Stewie responds, "Okay, it just sounded strange for a second." The fact that Stewie isn't even sure if heterosexual is a real word tells you everything you need to know about his confusion and uncertainty regarding his own identity. What the writers say, keeping it ambiguous on purpose. In the days following the episode's airing, the writers and producers gave several interviews explaining their approach to Stewie's sexuality. Their comments reveal a thoughtful, deliberate strategy to avoid definitive labels. Gary Janetti, who wrote "Send in Stewie, Please," spoke with TV Line about the episode. He explained, "Stewie's awareness of his sexuality is this uncertain thing, and that needs to stay as it is. His uncertainty gives him a vulnerability, which is something we need to maintain for the series." Janetti continued, "Whether he is gay or not, that isn't going to be answered when he's a 1-year-old. But if you read between the lines, it's not that difficult to decipher. He's not even sure heterosexual is a real word. This is key. The writers see Stewie's uncertainty as essential to his character. If they definitively labeled him as gay, straight, or bisexual, they would lose something important, the sense of a person, a baby, still figuring himself out." Rich Apple, an executive producer on Family Guy, told TV Line that he and Janetti discussed Stewie's sexuality extensively with Seth MacFarlane before writing the episode. Appel said MacFarlane's opinion was to not lean into it too much. He's still a baby. He doesn't know yet, and sexuality is a very fluid matter. It's better to keep that as something that's not determined yet. This represents a considered creative choice. The show could have made Stewie definitively gay. Many fans expected or wanted that. But the creative team decided that ambiguity, acknowledging the questions while refusing to provide simple answers, was more honest and more interesting. Seth MacFarlane's earlier comments, predicting Stewie's future. The 2018 episode wasn't the first time the show's creators addressed Stewie's sexuality. Seth MacFarlane, who created Family Guy and voices Stewie, along with Peter, Brian, and several other characters, had spoken about this issue in interviews years earlier. MacFarlane told entertainment journalists that when Stewie eventually grows up, he would likely become either homosexual or a very unhappy, repressed heterosexual. This comment appeared in multiple articles and interviews over the years, establishing MacFarlane's view that Stewie's adult sexuality would lean toward homosexuality even if he might try to hide or repress it. MacFarlane also said in interviews that the writers all feel that Stewie is almost certainly gay, and he's in the process of figuring it out for himself, he explained. "We haven't ever really locked into it because we get a lot of good jokes from both sides, but we treat him oftentimes as if we were writing a gay character." This reveals the pragmatic reality of writing for a long-running comedy series. The writers believe Stewie is probably gay, but they don't want to commit completely because maintaining ambiguity allows for more comedic possibilities. They can write jokes that play on Stewie potentially being gay, and they can also write jokes that play on him potentially being attracted to women. Having it both ways gives them more material to work with. However, MacFarlane later walked back some of these comments. He pointed out that Stewie is a cartoon character and, as such, doesn't need to be definitively gay or straight. Cartoon characters can exist in a state of fluid possibility that doesn't require the same kind of consistency we expect from live-action characters or real people. The evidence throughout the series. Reading the signs. Over the show's 20-plus seasons, Family Guy has included countless moments that hint at Stewie's sexuality. Some suggest he's gay, others suggest he's attracted to women. Many are deliberately ambiguous, designed to keep viewers guessing. Evidence suggesting Stewie might be gay In numerous episodes, Stewie shows attraction to male characters. He's expressed desire for men he sees on television, made suggestive comments about male celebrities, and shown romantic interest in male friends. In Patriot Games, Stewie becomes sexually aroused after seeing Tom Brady, the famous football player, showering. The show makes this reaction explicit and unmistakable. In Not All Dogs Go to Heaven, when someone asks Stewie if he's queer, he responds, "Probably." It's played as a joke, but it's also one of the few times Stewie directly acknowledges the possibility. In Chick Cancer, during the ending credits, Stewie says he could totally get into being gay. Again, it's comedic, but it suggests openness to the idea. In We Love You, Conrad, Stewie reveals his alter ego, Desiree, and mentions having multiple boyfriends, including one named Lee. In Family Gay, when Stewie mentions a straight camp, a place where gay people supposedly go to become straight, Brian notices the pamphlet is dated from the previous year, and Stewie looks uncomfortable, implying he might have attended such a camp himself. Stewie has also shown romantic or sexual interest in Brian, his best friend, and the family dog. In several episodes, particularly the Road to episodes, there are hints of something more than friendship between them, though this is always played ambiguously and often for comedy. Evidence suggesting Stewie might be attracted to women. Stewie has also shown clear attraction to female characters throughout the series. He had romantic relationships with a toddler beauty queen named Olivia in multiple episodes. He became sexually aroused while watching female cheerleaders undress. He nearly had sex with an older girl named Connie D'Amico in McStroke. In Stewie Griffin, The Untold Story, a direct-to-DVD movie released in 2005, we see Stewie's future adult self. This older Stewie has sex with a woman named Fran, though the encounter lasts only 8 seconds, after which Stewie cries for 40 minutes. Baby Stewie is horrified to discover that his future self is a virgin at 35 and seems romantically unsuccessful with women. In 8 Simple Rules for Buying My Teenage Daughter, Stewie falls in love with his teenage babysitter. He becomes genuinely infatuated with her, showing that his capacity for attraction isn't limited to people his own age. Stewie became instantly attracted to Jillian, Brian's girlfriend, at first sight in one episode. He also expressed romantic interest in Janet, another female toddler, in Damn It, Janet. The pattern of ambiguity. What becomes clear when you look at all these moments together is that the show deliberately includes evidence pointing in multiple directions. For every scene that suggests Stewie is gay, there's another that suggests he's attracted to women. The writers are having it both ways, keeping all possibilities open. This isn't sloppy writing or inconsistency. It's a conscious choice to portray Stewie's sexuality as genuinely uncertain, genuinely in flux, genuinely undetermined. Because, as the creators keep emphasizing, he's 1 year old. Real 1-year-olds don't have a sexual orientation in any meaningful sense. They're babies. The whole premise is absurd, which is part of what makes it funny and part of what makes definitive answers feel wrong. Why this matters: representation and responsibility. The question of Stewie's sexuality might seem trivial. He's a cartoon character in an adult animated comedy known for pushing boundaries and making offensive jokes. But the way Family Guy handles this question actually matters, both for representation and for how we think about sexuality more broadly. For LGBTQ+ viewers, seeing characters who reflect their experiences on television is important. Positive representation helps people feel seen, validated, and less alone. When a show as popular and long-running as Family Guy includes a potentially gay or bisexual character, that representation reaches millions of viewers. But representation also comes with responsibility. How do you portray a gay character without relying on stereotypes? How do you make jokes about sexuality without making the sexuality itself the punchline? How do you acknowledge a character's queerness without making that their only defining trait? Family Guy's approach, treating Stewie's sexuality as uncertain and fluid, sidesteps some of these challenges while creating others. On one hand, by refusing to label Stewie definitively, the show avoids locking him into potentially stereotypical gay character storylines. Stewie remains complex, unpredictable, and multifaceted. On the other hand, some critics argue that the show's refusal to commit is itself a problem. If Stewie is gay, or bisexual, or pansexual, why not just say so? Why keep it ambiguous? Does the ambiguity serve the character, or does it allow the show to use queerness for jokes while avoiding any real commitment to LGBTQ+ representation. These are legitimate questions without easy answers. Different viewers will have different opinions about whether Family Guy's approach is progressive, cowardly, or something in between. The special significance of Ian McKellen. The choice to have Sir Ian McKellen voice Dr. Pritchfield wasn't accidental. McKellen is one of the most respected actors of his generation, known for both dramatic and commercial success. But he's also one of the most prominent openly gay actors in the world, and a longtime LGBTQ+ advocate. McKellen came out publicly in 1988 during a BBC radio program when homosexuality was still highly stigmatized. He's been vocal about gay rights ever since, using his fame and platform to advocate for equality. He's spoken about the challenges of being a gay actor, the importance of representation, and the need for legal protections for LGBTQ+ people. Having McKellen voice the therapist in this particular episode sends a message. It says the show is taking this seriously. It's not just making gay jokes, it's engaging with questions of identity, self-discovery, and acceptance in a thoughtful way. McKellen's Dr. Pritchfield never pushes Stewie to label himself. He doesn't pressure Stewie to come out or to identify as gay, straight, or anything else. Instead, he listens, he observes, and he gently points out what he sees. When Stewie insists he's not gay, the therapist doesn't argue. He lets Stewie work through his own feelings at his own pace. This approach reflects modern psychological understanding of how to support young people questioning their sexuality. You don't impose labels. You don't rush them. You create a safe space for them to explore their feelings and figure out who they are without judgment. The fact that this happens in a Family Guy episode, a show not exactly known for sensitivity or psychological insight, is remarkable. It shows that even a comedy built on shock value and irreverence can, when it chooses, handle delicate topics with care. The broader context: how animation handles LGBTQ+ characters. Send in Stewie, Please aired in 2018, at a time when animated shows were increasingly including LGBTQ+ characters and storylines. This represented a significant shift from earlier decades, when such representation was rare or non-existent in mainstream animation. Shows like Steven Universe, which began airing in 2013, featured openly queer characters and same-sex relationships as central elements of the story. Adventure Time included Princess Bubblegum and Marceline's romantic relationship. The Legend of Korra ended with its two female leads beginning a romantic relationship. Bob's Burgers included several LGBTQ+ characters and treated them with warmth and respect. Even other adult animated comedies were addressing sexuality more directly. BoJack Horseman featured Todd, an asexual character, and explored what that identity means. Big Mouth, which premiered in 2017, explicitly addressed puberty, sexuality, and identity, including LGBTQ+ experiences. In this context, Family Guy's ambiguous approach to Stewie's sexuality is both progressive and conservative. Progressive because it acknowledges sexual fluidity and refuses to impose rigid labels. Conservative because it stops short of definitively representing a gay or bisexual main character, instead keeping everything in the realm of hints and maybes. The show's creators seem aware of this tension. They want credit for addressing the topic while also maintaining the freedom to avoid committing to anything specific. Whether this represents the best of both worlds or the worst of both worlds depends on your perspective. What fluid actually means. When Stewie uses the term fluid in the therapy session, he's referencing a real term used in contemporary discussions of sexuality: sexual fluidity. This concept recognizes that sexuality exists on a spectrum and can change over time. Someone who is sexually fluid might experience attraction to different genders at different points in their life. They might feel more attracted to men at one time and more attracted to women at another time. Or they might experience attraction to people regardless of gender, but with the intensity and frequency of that attraction varying over time. Sexual fluidity is different from bisexuality, though there's overlap. Bisexuality typically refers to the capacity to be attracted to more than one gender. Fluidity emphasizes the changing nature of attraction over time. The term has become more common in recent years, particularly among younger people who reject traditional categories and labels. It reflects a growing understanding that sexuality is complex and doesn't always fit into neat boxes. By having Stewie reference fluid as a term he's heard but doesn't fully understand, the show acknowledges contemporary conversations about sexuality while also emphasizing Stewie's confusion and uncertainty. He's heard the language people use to talk about these things, but he doesn't know if or how it applies to him. The comedy of uncertainty. One thing that makes Family Guy's approach work, at least some of the time, is that Stewie's sexual confusion is genuinely funny, not in a mean-spirited way, but in a relatable, awkward, human way. We've all experienced uncertainty about ourselves, who we are, what we want, where we fit in. Watching Stewie navigate these same questions, despite being a 1-year-old super genius, creates comedy that resonates. His attempts to seem confident while clearly being confused, his defensive reactions when confronted with questions about his identity, his casual mentions of finding male celebrities attractive, followed immediately by assertions of heterosexuality. All of this is comedically rich because it's psychologically true. The episode also finds humor in the therapy setting itself. Stewie's interactions with Dr. Pritchfield include funny exchanges that have nothing to do with sexuality. They discuss Stewie's accent, which is revealed to be fake, his relationship with his family, his feelings about preschool, and various other topics. The sexuality discussion is just one thread among many. This integration of the serious with the comedic is what allows the episode to work. It never becomes a very special episode that abandons humor in favor of preaching. It remains funny throughout while still saying something meaningful about identity and self-discovery. The question of age. Can a baby have a sexual orientation? The most challenging aspect of discussing Stewie's sexuality is the unavoidable fact that he's a baby. In the show's reality, Stewie is 1 year old. Real 1-year-olds don't have romantic attractions or sexual desires. They're infants. The entire premise is absurd. Of course, Stewie isn't really a baby in any meaningful sense. He talks like an adult, thinks like an adult, and has the knowledge and capabilities of an adult genius. He builds time machines, travels to alternate dimensions, and has sophisticated opinions about culture, politics, and philosophy. The only baby thing about him is his age and his physical form. This creates a paradox. The writers want to explore questions about Stewie's identity, including his sexuality, but they also don't want to sexualize an infant, which would be deeply inappropriate. So they're stuck in this weird middle ground where they acknowledge that Stewie seems to have romantic divided by sexual feelings, but also emphasize that he's too young to really understand or act on those feelings. The solution they've found is to keep everything ambiguous and undetermined. By having Stewie say things like, "I'm confident in my heterosexuality," followed immediately by, "That's a word, right?" They signal that he's confused, uncertain, and still figuring things out. He's not making definitive statements about his orientation because he's not old enough to know. This might be the most honest approach possible, given the inherent weirdness of the character. Stewie exists in a liminal space between childhood and adulthood, between innocence and experience, between not knowing and knowing too much. His sexuality, fittingly, exists in a similar liminal space, acknowledged but undefined, present but not yet actualized. The impact and legacy. 3 years after Send in Stewie, Please aired, what's the lasting impact? How did this episode change Family Guy? And how did it influence broader conversations about animated characters and LGBTQ+ representation? The honest answer is, not much changed. Family Guy continued being Family Guy. Stewie continued being Stewie. The show didn't suddenly become a champion of LGBTQ+ representation, and it didn't stop making edgy jokes about sexuality and identity. But the episode did demonstrate something important. Even a show built on irreverence and shock humor could pause for a moment of genuine character exploration. Even a show that regularly crosses lines and offends people could handle a sensitive topic with relative care and thoughtfulness. For fans, the episode provided clarity without resolution. We now know, officially, that Stewie's sexuality is deliberately ambiguous. The creators aren't going to give us a definitive answer because they don't think there should be one. Stewie is a baby figuring himself out, and that process doesn't have a neat conclusion. For critics and analysts, the episode provided a case study in how animated comedies navigate representation. It showed both the possibilities and the limitations of the format. Animation allows for absurd premises, a 1-year-old genius with romantic feelings, that would be impossible in live action. But it also creates challenges. How do you meaningfully explore sexuality when your character is literally an infant. The episode was covered extensively when it aired. Deadline ran the story with the headline, "Family Guy addresses Stewie's sexuality, his accent, and more." Screen Rant published, "Family Guy reveals Stewie's real voice and sexuality." Gay Times ran a piece titled, "Stewie finally addresses his sexuality in the latest episode of Family Guy." Entertainment outlets, from The Washington Blade to TV Line to various pop culture websites, discussed the episode and its implications. This media attention gave the episode significance beyond its immediate content. It became a cultural moment, a talking point, a reference in ongoing conversations about representation and identity in media. Living in the questions. Ultimately, Family Guy's approach to Stewie's sexuality is about living in the questions rather than rushing to answers. It's about acknowledging complexity, embracing ambiguity, and recognizing that not everything needs to be definitively resolved. For some viewers, this is frustrating. They want clarity. They want Stewie to be definitively gay, or definitively bisexual, or definitively something they can point to and say, "There, that's what he is." For others, the ambiguity is refreshing. It reflects the reality that many people experience, the sense that sexuality isn't always clear-cut, that attraction can be complicated, that identity is something we work out over time rather than something we're born knowing with certainty. Stewie's statement that he's less gay than I used to be is particularly interesting because it suggests his sexuality is changing over time. He's not fixed in one orientation. He's evolving, shifting, figuring himself out as he goes. This is actually quite progressive, even if it doesn't look like traditional representation. It suggests that sexuality can be fluid, that it's okay not to have all the answers, and that the process of self-discovery is ongoing and never fully complete. When Dr. Pritchfield asks about Stewie pushing Tyler down the stairs, and Stewie admits he did it because he likes Tyler but is afraid Tyler won't like him back, we see something universal. Every human has felt that fear, the fear of rejection, of not being liked back, of putting yourself out there and being hurt. Whether Stewie's feelings for Tyler are romantic, platonic, or something else doesn't really matter. What matters is the vulnerability, the fear, the desire for connection. Those feelings are real, regardless of what label we put on them. And maybe that's the point. Maybe Family Guy isn't being cowardly or evasive by refusing to label Stewie's sexuality. Maybe they're recognizing that the label matters less than the experience, the confusion, the discovery, the gradual process of figuring out who you are and what you want. Stewie Griffin is sexually fluid, or maybe he's gay, or maybe he's bisexual, or maybe he's still too young to know, or maybe he'll never know with certainty, or maybe he knows but isn't ready to admit it. All of these things might be true, and after 20 years of Family Guy, that's the only answer we're going to get. Stewie is Stewie, complicated, contradictory, still figuring himself out, just like the rest of us. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the theory that Brian's alcoholism is literally killing his brain. Brian's alcoholism is destroying his mind, the tragic decline of Family Guy's smartest character. When Family Guy premiered in 1999, Brian Griffin was the voice of reason. The anthropomorphic white Labrador was the smartest character in the Griffin household, maybe the smartest character in all of Quahog. He read novels, quoted philosophers, engaged in political debates, and offered thoughtful advice to his dysfunctional family. He was educated, cultured, and articulate. He was, in many ways, the moral center of the show. But something changed over the years. Slowly, gradually, episode by episode, Brian became less intelligent and more insufferable. He transformed from the wise family pet into a pretentious, hypocritical, self-absorbed failure. He became stupider, meaner, and increasingly unable to see his own flaws. His good qualities faded, while his worst traits intensified. Most viewers assumed this was just bad writing, the common TV phenomenon called flanderization, where characters become exaggerated caricatures of themselves over time. The name comes from Ned Flanders on The Simpsons, who started as a friendly, mildly religious neighbor and gradually became a one-dimensional religious fanatic. But one fan theory offers a darker, more disturbing explanation. Brian isn't suffering from bad writing. He's suffering from brain damage. His cognitive decline isn't a creative choice by lazy writers, it's a realistic portrayal of what alcohol and drug abuse do to the human brain. Brian's personality changes track, almost perfectly, with the neurological damage that occurs in real-life alcoholics and addicts. The theory, alcoholism is literally killing Brian's brain. The theory was popularized by a Reddit user named Grandmaster Sexay, who posted an analysis that quickly went viral in the Family Guy fan community. The post was subsequently cited on major entertainment websites including Ranker and WatchMojo, spreading the theory to a much wider audience. The core argument is simple but devastating. Brian has been an alcoholic and drug user throughout the entire series. He drinks heavily in almost every episode, often starting in the morning. He's been shown using marijuana, cocaine, and various other substances. He's never sober. He's been abusing alcohol and drugs continuously for over 20 years of showtime and more than 20 years of real time. And in real life, chronic alcohol and drug abuse causes progressive, irreversible brain damage. The effects include impaired judgment and decision-making, memory problems, difficulty learning new information, reduced impulse control, increased aggression and irritability, decreased ability to understand consequences, loss of emotional regulation, cognitive rigidity, inability to change patterns of thinking, reduced self-awareness. Look at that list. Now think about how Brian has changed over the course of Family Guy's run. Every single symptom matches his character evolution perfectly. Grandmaster Sexay described this deterioration as progressive douchiness, Brian becoming increasingly unbearable as his brain slowly deteriorates from substance abuse. But it's not just that he's become a jerk. He's become demonstrably less intelligent, less capable, and less functional as a person, or dog, technically. The theory suggests that what looks like character flanderization is actually the show unintentionally, or perhaps intentionally, depicting the realistic consequences of untreated addiction. Brian's worsening behavior isn't random or inconsistent. It follows the actual medical trajectory of an addict's cognitive decline. Early, Brian, the smart dog who could have been something. To understand Brian's decline, we need to remember who he was at the beginning. In the early seasons of Family Guy, Brian was genuinely intelligent and accomplished. He was a published author. His novel hadn't been a massive success, but it existed. He had literary ambitions that seemed realistic rather than delusional. Brian functioned as Peter's conscience, often pulling him back from his worst impulses. When Peter would come up with a terrible idea, Brian would be there to point out why it was terrible and suggest something better. He had perspective. He could see situations clearly and offer helpful guidance. Brian also had real friendships and romantic relationships that functioned relatively normally. He dated several women throughout the early seasons. These relationships had problems, sure, but they were recognizable human problems, communication issues, different life goals, ordinary incompatibilities. Brian wasn't perfect, but he was capable of genuine connection. His drinking was present from the beginning. Brian has always enjoyed his martinis, but it seemed more like sophisticated social drinking than addiction. He drank at parties, at the bar with Peter and the guys, in social situations. It looked like adult recreational drinking, not alcoholism. But even in the early seasons, there were hints of something darker. Brian drank alone. He drank in the morning. He drank when he was upset, stressed, or anxious. He used alcohol as a coping mechanism. The signs of addiction were there from the start. They just hadn't fully manifested yet. The decline begins. Subtle changes add up. The change didn't happen overnight. Brian's decline was gradual, which is exactly how real addiction-related brain damage works. It creeps up slowly, damaging neural pathways bit by bit, degrading cognitive function in ways that might not be obvious at first. In the middle seasons of Family Guy, roughly seasons 5 to 10, Brian started exhibiting new behaviors. His judgment got worse. He made increasingly poor decisions, often obviously bad choices that early series Brian would have seen through immediately. He got involved in schemes that were clearly doomed to fail. He trusted people he obviously shouldn't trust. His ability to assess situations and make rational decisions was deteriorating. His writing career stalled and failed. Brian's novel, Faster Than the Speed of Love, was published and immediately bombed. The book was terrible, poorly written, cliched, and self-indulgent. When critics panned it and sales were abysmal, Brian couldn't handle the criticism. He became defensive, angry, and unable to accept that maybe the book genuinely wasn't good. This represents a significant decline from early Brian, who was capable of self-reflection and growth. The Brian who wrote that terrible novel had lost the ability to accurately assess his own work. He couldn't see his own flaws. This lack of self-awareness is a classic symptom of both addiction and the brain damage that addiction causes. He became more hypocritical. Brian started preaching liberal political views while acting in ways that completely contradicted those values. He'd give speeches about treating people with respect, then immediately be rude to service workers. He'd talk about the importance of honesty, then lie constantly. He'd advocate for social justice while being selfish and cruel in his personal life. Early Brian had some hypocritical moments, but he could generally be called out on them and would feel genuine shame. Later, Brian seemed completely unaware of his hypocrisy, even when people pointed it directly to his face. His relationships became dysfunctional. Brian's romantic relationships went from normal problems to complete disasters. He started pursuing women who were clearly wrong for him. He sabotaged good relationships through his own selfishness and inability to consider anyone's needs but his own. He became jealous, possessive, and manipulative in ways he hadn't been before. His dependence on Stewie increased. Brian's friendship with Stewie is one of the emotional cores of Family Guy, but over time, the relationship became less balanced. Brian increasingly relied on Stewie to solve his problems, bail him out of situations, and provide emotional support. Meanwhile, Brian became less capable of being there for Stewie in return. All of these changes are consistent with progressive brain damage from substance abuse. The frontal lobe, the part of the brain responsible for judgment, planning, impulse control, and self-awareness, is particularly vulnerable to alcohol-related damage. As this region deteriorates, people become less able to regulate their behavior, less capable of learning from mistakes, and less aware of how they're perceived by others. The turning point, when Brian became unbearable. There's a specific episode that many fans point to as the moment Brian crossed a line from flawed but sympathetic to genuinely awful. Jerome is the New Black, which aired in season 8, 2009. In this episode, Quagmire, Peter's hypersexual, morally questionable neighbor, delivers a brutal speech explaining exactly why he hates Brian. Quagmire lists Brian's flaws in excruciating detail. He constantly hits on Lois, even though she's married to his best friend. He has a fake, affected personality. He's pretentious without being genuinely intelligent or accomplished. He's a terrible writer who can't accept criticism. He's selfish and self-absorbed. He preaches liberal values but doesn't live by them. He acts superior to everyone while actually being a failure. The speech goes on for quite a while, and it's devastating because every single point is accurate. Quagmire is calling out behaviors the audience has been watching for years, and Brian has no comeback. He just stands there, shocked, unable to defend himself because everything Quagmire said is true. This scene is significant because it represents the show's writers acknowledging Brian's decline. They were aware that Brian had become insufferable. They knew viewers were noticing, and they had a character explicitly spell out all the ways Brian had deteriorated. But here's what makes the alcoholism theory so compelling. After this moment, Brian doesn't get better. He doesn't learn from this devastating critique. He doesn't change his behavior. If anything, he gets worse. In real life, people with addiction-related brain damage often struggle to modify their behavior, even when they clearly understand they should. The neural pathways that allow for self-correction and behavior modification are literally damaged. Knowing you have a problem and being able to fix it are two different things, and the second one requires healthy brain function that Brian no longer has. The physical evidence: Brian's appearance changes too. It's not just Brian's personality and cognitive abilities that deteriorate, his physical appearance changes as well, in ways consistent with chronic alcoholism. In later seasons, Brian often looks rough. He appears tired, haggard, sometimes disheveled. His eyes sometimes look bloodshot. These are subtle animation choices, but they're there if you look for them. Chronic alcohol abuse causes visible physical changes: premature aging, weight fluctuations, poor skin quality, and a generally unhealthy appearance. The show's animators didn't have to include these details, but they did, suggesting the visual decline might be intentional. There are also episodes where Brian's drinking is explicitly portrayed as problematic. In Road to Rhode Island, Season 2, 2000, we learn that Brian's mother died and was stuffed by her owners, a traumatic discovery that Brian deals with by drinking. In multiple episodes, Brian is shown drinking to cope with stress, rejection, or disappointment. In Brian's Got a Brand New Bag, Season 8, 2009, Brian dates a much older woman, and his friends stage an intervention, though the intervention is about the age gap relationship rather than the drinking. But during the intervention scene, Brian is holding a drink, highlighting how alcohol is always present in his life. The show has never done a very special episode about Brian's alcoholism. There's never been a moment where he admits he has a problem and goes to rehab. His drinking is just a constant background element of his character, which is exactly how real functional alcoholics often operate. They drink constantly. Everyone knows they drink constantly, but it's normalized to the point where nobody really addresses it. Comparing early Brian to late Brian, a side-by-side analysis. To really see Brian's decline, it helps to directly compare his behavior across different eras of the show. Intelligence and competence. Early, Brian seasons 1 to 4. Reads literature, makes intelligent observations, solves problems, helps the family navigate challenges. Late Brian, seasons 15 plus, makes stupid decisions, can't solve basic problems, offers terrible advice that makes situations worse. Writing career. Early Brian, has published work, takes writing seriously, shows actual talent. Late Brian, publishes terrible novel that fails, can't handle criticism, hasn't written anything successful in years, deludes himself about his abilities. Self-awareness. Early Brian, capable of recognizing his own flaws, can be embarrassed when called out, shows growth. Late Brian, completely blind to his own behavior, can't accept criticism, doesn't learn from mistakes. Relationships. Early Brian, has normal relationships with genuine connections, capable of considering partners' needs. Late Brian, every relationship fails due to his selfishness, can't maintain healthy connections, sabotages any potential happiness. Hypocrisy. Early Brian, occasionally hypocritical, but generally tries to live up to his stated values. Late Brian, massive gap between what he says and what he does, completely unaware of his own hypocrisy, even when explicitly pointed out. Emotional regulation. Early Brian, can handle disappointment and setbacks with relative maturity. Late Brian, emotionally volatile, aggressive when challenged, can't cope with criticism or failure. Relationship with Stewie. Early Brian, equal partnership, both characters benefit from the friendship. Late Brian, increasingly dependent on Stewie, less capable of reciprocating support. Every single category shows clear deterioration over time, and every category of decline matches symptoms of alcohol-related brain damage. The drug use makes it even worse. Brian isn't just an alcoholic, he's also a drug user. The show has depicted Brian using marijuana regularly and cocaine on multiple occasions. He's also been shown taking prescription medications that weren't prescribed to him and experimenting with various other substances. While marijuana is less neurotoxic than alcohol, chronic use, especially in combination with alcohol, does affect cognitive function. Studies have shown that heavy, long-term marijuana use can impact memory, attention, and executive function, particularly when use begins at a young age and continues over many years. Cocaine is significantly more dangerous. Cocaine causes cardiovascular damage, but it also has serious neurological effects. It damages the prefrontal cortex, reduces overall brain volume, accelerates brain aging, and causes cognitive deficits that can persist long after someone stops using. The combination of alcohol, marijuana, cocaine, and whatever else Brian has consumed over the years would create a synergistic effect, each substance magnifying the damage caused by the others. His brain isn't just dealing with one toxic substance, it's dealing with multiple neurotoxins simultaneously over an extended period. In medical terms, Brian would be classified as a polysubstance abuser, someone who regularly uses multiple drugs. Polysubstance abuse is associated with more severe cognitive impairment, worse treatment outcomes, and faster progression of addiction-related damage. Real-life parallels. When smart people drink themselves stupid. The tragedy of Brian's story is that it mirrors real-life stories of intelligent, talented people who destroyed their potential through addiction. There are countless examples of writers, artists, intellectuals, and professionals who started out brilliant and ended up shells of themselves due to substance abuse. Writers, in particular, have a notorious association with alcoholism. Ernest Hemingway, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Raymond Carver, Dorothy Parker, Tennessee Williams, Jack Kerouac, and countless others struggled with alcohol. Some died from it. Others survived but never regained their earlier creative powers. The pattern is depressingly similar to Brian's story. A talented person starts drinking socially or to cope with stress. The drinking gradually increases. Their work quality declines, but they can't see it. They become defensive about criticism. Their relationships suffer. Their judgment deteriorates. They make increasingly poor decisions, all while insisting they have everything under control. Friends and family often describe watching someone they loved slowly disappear. The person looks the same on the outside, but their personality, their intelligence, their very essence seems to fade away. What's left is someone who looks like their loved one but acts like a stranger. This is exactly what happened to Brian Griffin. The intelligent, thoughtful dog from season 1 is essentially gone. Something that looks like Brian remains, but the core of who he was has been destroyed by years of substance abuse. Could Brian recover? One of the most heartbreaking aspects of this theory is that Brian's decline is likely irreversible. Once significant brain damage occurs from chronic alcoholism, recovery is limited. If Brian stopped drinking today, he might regain some cognitive function. Studies show that the brain has remarkable plasticity and can heal to some degree if given the chance. Memory might improve slightly, emotional regulation might stabilize, some executive function could return, but he would never be season 1 Brian again. The neurons that died over the past 20+ years aren't coming back. The brain volume that was lost is gone forever. The neural pathways that deteriorated can't be fully rebuilt. And here's the devastating reality. Brian shows no signs of stopping. He doesn't think he has a problem. This is itself a symptom of his cognitive impairment. The very brain damage that's destroying him prevents him from recognizing that anything is wrong. In addiction medicine, this is called lack of insight, or anosognosia. The damage to the frontal lobes impairs the ability to accurately assess one's own condition. Addicts with brain damage literally cannot see what everyone else can clearly observe, that they have a serious problem that's destroying their life. Brian drinks in almost every episode. No one seriously challenges it. The Griffin family has normalized his drinking to the point where it's just how Brian is. This is exactly how enabling works in real families affected by addiction. Everyone adjusts to the addict's behavior rather than confronting it. Why this theory matters? It's darker than you think. If this theory is correct, if Brian's decline really does represent realistic cognitive deterioration from substance abuse, then Family Guy has been telling one of the darkest stories on television, hiding it inside a crude comedy. We're watching someone we care about slowly destroy themselves. We're watching brain damage occur in real time, episode by episode, season by season. We're watching addiction kill someone just very, very slowly. And we're laughing because it's a comedy, because the show presents everything with humor and irreverence, because it's a cartoon, so nothing feels quite real. But if you stop laughing for a moment and think about what's actually happening, a highly intelligent being slowly losing their mental faculties due to untreated addiction, while everyone around them either doesn't notice or doesn't care enough to intervene, it's genuinely tragic. The theory suggests that Family Guy is either unintentionally creating a realistic portrait of addiction-related cognitive decline through what they thought was just character flanderization, or deliberately showing this decline but disguising it as comedy, trusting that some viewers will see through the jokes to the darker reality underneath. Either way, it's disturbing. It recontextualizes every Brian episode. Every stupid decision he makes isn't just a joke, it's evidence of ongoing neurological damage. Every time he drinks, he's making himself worse. Every time he fails to learn from his mistakes, it's because his damaged brain can't form the neural connections necessary to change. The evidence keeps adding up. The more you look at Brian's story through the lens of addiction-related cognitive decline, the more evidence you find. His inability to hold a job for any length of time, classic addiction behavior and executive function impairment. His constant failed relationships, addiction destroys intimate connections and damages the brain regions that allow for emotional bonding. His financial problems despite having no real expenses, poor judgment and impulse control problems from frontal lobe damage, his need to drink at all hours. The brain of an alcoholic has physically changed to require alcohol to function normally. His defensive reactions when confronted about his drinking, denial and lack of insight from cognitive impairment. His inability to finish writing projects, addiction and brain damage impair focus, motivation, and the ability to engage in complex, sustained tasks. His worsening treatment of the people who care about him, damage to brain regions responsible for empathy and social understanding. Every symptom fits. Every behavior makes sense through this lens. The theory isn't just plausible, it's almost impossible to ignore once you see it. Living with the theory, how it changes the show. Once you accept the alcoholism theory, Family Guy becomes a different show. Not necessarily a worse show, but a darker one, a more complex one. A show that's saying something meaningful about addiction, even if it's saying it quietly underneath all the jokes. Every episode becomes a chapter in Brian's long decline. Every drink he takes is another small nail in the coffin of his cognitive abilities. Every stupid decision is evidence that the damage is progressing. Every moment of selfishness or cruelty is a symptom of a brain that's losing its ability to consider others. And because this is an animated sitcom where characters don't age and consequences rarely stick, Brian's decline might continue forever. He'll never hit rock bottom and get help. He'll never have a moment of clarity and choose recovery. He'll just keep drinking, keep declining, keep becoming a worse version of himself, episode after episode, season after season, for as long as Family Guy continues to air. That's the bleakest part of the theory. In real life, addiction stories can have different endings. People can recover, they can get help, stop using, and rebuild their lives. The brain damage might be permanent, but they can adapt, develop coping strategies, and find new ways to function. But Brian can't recover because the show needs him to stay exactly as he is. He's locked into this state of decline forever. He's trapped in a hell of his own making, unable to change, unable to escape, unable to even recognize that anything is wrong. We're watching someone die slowly. We've been watching it for over 20 years, and it's presented as comedy. That's the theory. That's what Grandmaster Sexay saw, and what thousands of fans came to recognize. Brian Griffin isn't getting dumber because the writers are bad at their jobs. He's getting dumber because that's what alcohol does. His cognitive decline isn't a mistake, it's the most realistic thing about him. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Brian's tragedy becomes the dark heart of Family Guy, hiding in plain sight, disguised as jokes about a drunk dog who thinks he's better than everyone else. He was better than everyone else, once, before the drinking destroyed his brain, before the addiction took away everything that made him special, before 20+ years of substance abuse killed the person he used to be, leaving only this damaged, declining shadow. That's the theory, and it explains everything. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the theory that Quahog's polluted water causes the town's insanity. Quahog's poisoned water is making everyone crazy. Family Guy takes place in Quahog, Rhode Island, a seemingly normal American town where completely insane things happen every day. People survive falls that should kill them. Characters act like total idiots. The show cuts away to random hallucinations that have nothing to do with what's happening. Everyone behaves like they've lost their minds. Most viewers assume this is just how cartoons work. It's comedy. It's not supposed to make sense. But one fan theory offers a darker explanation. The people of Quahog aren't just cartoon characters acting silly. They're genuinely brain damaged from drinking poisoned water. The canon evidence: Lake Quahog is actually polluted. This isn't just speculation. The show itself confirms that Quahog's water supply is contaminated with toxic chemicals. This is canon. It actually happened in multiple episodes. In Season 5, Episode 3, Hell Comes to Quahog, 2006, a giant superstore called Superstore USA opens in town. The store sells everything cheaply but drives all the local businesses out of operation. The episode shows the negative impacts of the megastore on the community. But the most important detail happens in Season 5, Episode 18, It Takes a Village Idiot, and I Married One, 2007. In this episode, Lois runs for mayor of Quahog against incumbent Adam West. During her campaign, she discovers something shocking. Lake Quahog has been seriously polluted by waste from the Quahog oil refinery. The pollution is so bad that when the Griffin family goes swimming in the lake, they all lose their hair. Every single one of them goes completely bald from the toxic water. This is how severe the contamination is. It causes immediate physical damage. Lois, as the new mayor, makes cleaning up Lake Quahog one of her priorities. She actually succeeds in getting the lake cleaned. The water becomes safe again. The town celebrates. But then Lois gets corrupted by power and money. Bob Grossbeard, the CEO of Quahog Oil Refinery, bribes her with an expensive fur coat. In exchange, Lois allows him to resume dumping toxic waste into Lake Quahog. The pollution returns. This isn't a throwaway joke. The show explicitly establishes that Quahog's water supply has been poisoned with industrial chemicals for years, was briefly cleaned up, and then was deliberately repolluted for profit. The theory: the chemicals are destroying everyone's brains. Here's where the theory gets dark. Lake Quahog is the town's water source. When the lake is polluted, the entire town is drinking contaminated water, and they've been drinking it for years, possibly decades. Industrial waste from oil refineries contains numerous toxic chemicals known to cause neurological damage. Heavy metals like lead and mercury cause brain damage, lower IQ, impair judgment, and cause behavioral problems. Benzene damages the nervous system and causes cognitive impairment. Polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, PAHs, are neurotoxic and cause developmental problems. Volatile organic compounds, VOCs, affect brain function and cause confusion. Chronic exposure to these chemicals, drinking them in your water every single day, would cause serious neurological problems. The effects would include impaired judgment and decision-making, memory problems, reduced impulse control, behavioral changes, mood swings, and aggression, difficulty understanding cause and effect, possible hallucinations, or distorted perception. Now look at how the residents of Quahog behave. Peter Griffin makes catastrophically stupid decisions constantly. Lois goes from reasonable to insane depending on the episode. Cleveland is weirdly calm about everything. Joe overreacts violently to minor problems. Quagmire's sexual behavior goes beyond normal and into genuinely disturbing territory. Adam West, as mayor, makes completely insane policy decisions, like sending the entire police force to Colombia to search for a fictional movie character. Everyone in Quahog acts brain damaged, and according to the show's own continuity, they've all been drinking poisoned water for years. The Cutaways, chemical-induced hallucinations. Family Guy is famous for its cutaway gags, those random flashback or fantasy sequences that interrupt the main story. Peter will say something like, "This is worse than that time I fought a giant chicken," and then the show cuts to a 5-minute fight scene with a giant chicken that has nothing to do with the plot. The standard explanation is that these cutaways are just the show's comedic style. They're non-canon jokes that exist outside the story. But the theory suggests something darker. The cutaways are hallucinations. They're not real memories or real events. They're chemically induced delusions caused by brain damage from the contaminated water. Think about it. The cutaways often make no logical sense. They reference events that couldn't possibly have happened. They're absurd, disconnected from reality, and sometimes genuinely disturbing. They show exactly the kind of distorted thinking you'd expect from someone suffering from toxic chemical exposure. Peter doesn't actually remember fighting the giant chicken over an expired coupon. Well, that fight is semi-canon, but you get the point. His brain, damaged by years of drinking poisoned water, is creating false memories and weird associations. When he tries to explain something, his contaminated mind produces these bizarre mental images instead of coherent thoughts. The same applies to all the characters. When Lois has flashbacks to her rich upbringing, we see increasingly absurd scenarios. When Stewie remembers something, it's often nonsensical. These aren't memories, they're symptoms of neurological damage, how the characters changed before and after pollution. The theory suggests that the character's behavior has gotten progressively worse as the years of chemical exposure add up. Let's look at specific changes. Peter Griffin. In early seasons, Peter was dumb but not completely non-functional. He held jobs. He made some reasonable decisions. He could occasionally think through problems. Later, Peter is catastrophically stupid, makes decisions that should result in his death, and seems to have lost all connection to cause and effect. This tracks with progressive brain damage from toxin exposure. Lois Griffin. Early Lois was the responsible parent trying to hold the family together. Later Lois becomes increasingly violent, unstable, and cruel. She goes from patient mother to someone who seems genuinely disturbed. Her behavior becomes erratic and unpredictable, consistent with neurological damage. Chris Griffin. Chris started as a somewhat slow teenager with normal teen problems. He's become progressively dumber and more bizarre. His artwork goes from weird kid stuff to genuine signs of mental disturbance. His behavior becomes increasingly disconnected from reality. Stewie Griffin. Interestingly, Stewie seems to get less violent and more normal over time. The theory could explain this too. As a baby, he's been exposed for less time than the adults. His brain is still developing and might be adapting better. Or perhaps his genius-level intelligence gives him more cognitive reserve to resist the damage. Meg Griffin. Meg starts as an awkward but relatively normal teenager. Over time, she becomes more disturbed, developing genuinely dark psychological problems. She becomes a serial killer in some episodes, played for laughs, but still, her mental state clearly deteriorates. Every character shows signs of progressive neurological decline consistent with chronic exposure to neurotoxic chemicals. The timeline: when did the pollution start? The show establishes that the Quahog oil refinery has been dumping waste into Lake Quahog for a long time, probably since before the series started. This means the Griffin family and other residents have been drinking contaminated water from the very beginning. But the damage would be cumulative. The longer you're exposed, the worse the effects become. This explains why the characters seem to get crazier as the seasons progress. Season 1 Peter is noticeably different from Season 20 Peter. His stupidity has intensified, his judgment has worsened, his behavior has become more extreme. This isn't just the writers running out of ideas, it's the realistic progression of someone who's been ingesting neurotoxins for 20+ years. The same pattern appears across the whole cast. Everyone gets worse over time, their decision-making deteriorates, their behavior becomes more erratic, their grip on reality loosens. If you plot the show's timeline against real-world data on chronic toxin exposure, the progression matches almost perfectly. The characters are showing exactly the symptoms you'd expect at each stage of long-term poisoning. Real-world parallels. When pollution destroys communities. This isn't science fiction. Real communities have been devastated by water contamination. Flint, Michigan. Lead contamination in the water supply caused widespread health problems, including neurological damage in children. The effects included behavioral problems, learning difficulties, and developmental delays. Woburn, Massachusetts. Industrial solvents contaminated the water supply. Residents developed cancer and other serious health problems. The case became famous through the book and movie, A Civil Action. Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. From the 1,950 seconds to 1,980 seconds, Marines and their families drank water contaminated with industrial solvents. Thousands developed serious health problems, including neurological disorders. Love Canal, New York. An entire neighborhood was built on a toxic waste dump. Residents suffered health problems for years before the contamination was discovered. In every case, people initially didn't realize anything was wrong. They drank the water, used it for cooking and bathing, and slowly got sicker. The effects were gradual enough that people didn't immediately connect their symptoms to the water. Behavioral changes were common. People became more irritable, had difficulty thinking clearly, made poor decisions, and experienced mood swings. These weren't character flaws, they were neurological symptoms of chemical poisoning. Quahog's situation mirrors these real-world disasters. An industrial facility pollutes the local water supply. Authorities either don't notice or don't care. Residents drink the contaminated water for years. Everyone gradually becomes more dysfunctional. By the time anyone realizes what's happening, the damage is already done. Why nobody does anything? The damage prevents recognition. Here's the truly dark part of the theory. The contaminated water damages people's brains so severely that they lose the ability to recognize there's a problem. The frontal lobe, the brain region responsible for judgment, planning, and problem solving, is particularly vulnerable to toxic damage. When this region is impaired, people lose the ability to recognize they have a problem, connect cause and effect, plan solutions, follow through on decisions, understand long-term consequences. This means the very thing that's destroying Quahog's residents also prevents them from doing anything about it. They're trapped in a cycle. The pollution makes them stupid, and their stupidity prevents them from stopping the pollution. Lois briefly cleaned up the lake when she became mayor, but then she took a bribe and allowed the pollution to resume. Why would she do something so obviously harmful? Because her brain, already damaged by years of toxin exposure, couldn't properly assess the long-term consequences. The immediate reward, a nice coat, outweighed the abstract future harm, continued poisoning of the entire town. Mayor Adam West makes insane decisions throughout the series, spending tax money on ridiculous projects, creating absurd laws, and generally being completely unfit for office. Is he just crazy? Or is his brain so damaged by drinking contaminated water that he's literally incapable of rational governance? The theory suggests everyone in Quahog is cognitively impaired to the point where they can't solve the problem that's impairing them. They're stuck. Why the Griffins don't move away. If life in Quahog is so crazy and dangerous, why doesn't the Griffin family just leave? This is a question many viewers have asked. The theory provides an answer. They're too brain damaged to realize they should leave. Peter frequently loses his job, endangers his family, and faces life-threatening situations. A rational person would relocate to a safer, more stable environment, but Peter never seriously considers moving. None of them do. There are episodes where the family briefly moves elsewhere. They went to Texas for a while, for instance, but they always come back to Quahog. Why? The theory suggests they're psychologically dependent on the contaminated water. Their brains have adapted to the toxins to the point where they need them to function. Leaving Quahog and drinking clean water elsewhere would essentially put them into withdrawal. They'd feel wrong, uncomfortable, not like themselves. This is similar to how real addiction works. An addict's brain physically changes to require the drug. Without it, they feel terrible. With it, they feel normal, even though they're actually impaired. The residents of Quahog have been drinking poisoned water so long that clean water would feel strange to them. Their brains have rewired around the toxins. Leaving would mean confronting how damaged they've become, something their impaired brains are incapable of doing. The show's awareness. Are the writers in on it? Did the Family Guy writers intentionally create a story about a town slowly being poisoned into insanity? Or is this just a fan theory reading too much into coincidental details? The evidence suggests the writers are at least somewhat aware. They explicitly established the water pollution as canon. They showed the harmful effects. They demonstrated that authorities, Lois, can be bribed to allow the pollution to continue. But they've never done an episode that directly addresses the theory. There's never been a moment where someone says, hey, maybe all our crazy behavior is because we've been drinking poison for 20 years. This could mean the writers planted the pollution storyline as a subtle explanation for the show's absurdity, trusting smart viewers to make the connection. They established the pollution for one episode's plot and didn't think about the larger implications. They're vaguely aware that the pollution could explain things but prefer to keep it ambiguous. Regardless of intent, the pieces fit together. The show gives us all the information needed to construct this theory. The pollution is real, the symptoms match, and the timeline works. Other weird Quahog events explained. The poisoned water theory doesn't just explain why characters act crazy, it explains other weird aspects of Quahog's reality. Why people survive impossible injuries. Their biology has been altered by chemical exposure. They're no longer quite human in the normal sense. Why reality seems inconsistent. It's not reality that's inconsistent, it's everyone's perception of reality, warped by neurotoxic damage. Why nobody seems to remember major events. The toxins cause memory problems and cognitive impairment. Why the town faces constant disasters. The authorities are too brain damaged to govern properly or respond to crises effectively. Why businesses constantly fail and reappear. Nobody can run a business competently when their brains are poisoned. Why the police are incompetent. The entire police force drinks the same contaminated water as everyone else. Every bizarre element of life in Quahog can be traced back to the poisoned water supply. The saddest part, it's not going to get better. The most depressing aspect of this theory is that there's no hope of improvement. In a normal story about environmental disaster, people eventually discover the problem, clean up the pollution, and begin to recover. But Family Guy is a sitcom. The status quo must be maintained. Quahog will never be truly cleaned up because the show needs it to stay crazy. The characters will never recover because the show needs them to keep behaving absurdly. The residents of Quahog are trapped in an endless cycle of poisoning and dysfunction. They'll keep drinking the contaminated water. Their brains will continue deteriorating. They'll make increasingly poor decisions. They'll suffer consequences, forget what happened, and repeat the same mistakes. And it will never stop, not as long as the show keeps airing. This transforms Family Guy from a simple comedy into something darker, a story about environmental disaster, corporate negligence, government corruption, and a community slowly poisoning itself to death while being too impaired to save themselves. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the theory that Peter's kids all have different fathers. The Stan Thompson revelation. In the Season 3 episode Screwed the Pooch, something bizarre happened in a courtroom that would haunt Meg Griffin forever, if only she had heard it. Brian was trying to prove he knew the Griffin family better than anyone, answering Peter's questions about his kids to show what a great father figure he was. Peter asked about little details like Chris's favorite ice cream and Stewie's favorite bedtime story. Then came the bombshell. When Peter started to say, Meg's real father is, Brian immediately responded with Stan Thompson. The timing was almost too perfect. Meg was sitting right there in the courtroom, but she had her headphones on, blasting music. She missed the entire revelation that the man she called Dad might not actually be her biological father. The show treated it like a throwaway joke, but it landed in the episode and just sat there. Nobody followed up, nobody corrected it. The name Stan Thompson was thrown out into the universe, and then Family Guy moved on like nothing happened. This wasn't some random character making the claim either. Brian said it with total confidence, like it was common knowledge in the Griffin household. Peter didn't correct him or act surprised. He just accepted it as fact. The scene played out like everyone in the family knew about Stan Thompson, except for Meg herself. And that's pretty much the most Meg thing that could possibly happen, her entire family, knowing her real dad isn't Peter, and nobody bothering to tell her. Who is Stan Thompson? Anyway, here's where things get weird. After that one mention in Screwed the Pooch, Stan Thompson basically vanished. The show never brought him back. We never met him. We never saw a picture. We got zero information about who this guy is or how he ended up fathering Meg. Family Guy just dropped this massive piece of information and then ghosted the entire storyline. The Family Guy wiki lists Stan Thompson as possibly Meg's real father, based entirely on that single scene. There's no other canon evidence, no flashbacks showing Lois with another man before Peter, no explanation for how Peter ended up raising someone else's kid. The show has retconned Meg's birth multiple times throughout its run, making it nearly impossible to track what's actually supposed to be true. In later episodes, the show seemed to forget about Stan Thompson entirely. In Not All Dogs Go to Heaven, Brian even points out that Meg resembles Peter, which would contradict the whole Stan Thompson thing. But Family Guy has never been a show that worries too much about continuity. The writers will throw out a joke in one episode and completely contradict it 3 seasons later without batting an eye. The many births of Chris Griffin. Chris Griffin's origin story is even messier than Meg's. The show can't seem to decide how Chris came into existence, and they've given us at least 4 different versions of events. In A Mission Impossible from Season 3, Lois and Chris are looking through a family photo album together. Chris points to a picture and says, "And here's the broken condom that led to my birth." Lois hugs him and says, "And the lawsuit that followed bought us this house. You're our favorite mistake." That seems pretty straightforward. Peter and Lois made Chris the old-fashioned way. A condom broke, Lois got pregnant, they sued the condom company, and used the settlement money to buy their house on Spooner Street. Case closed, right? Not even close. Fast forward to Season 17's Regarding Carter, and suddenly Peter is talking about finding Lois's gun along with Chris's adoption papers. Adoption papers? So now Chris wasn't born to Peter and Lois, he was adopted? The show throws this out there without any explanation of how it squares with the broken condom story, the lawsuit, or any of the other times we've seen references to Chris's birth. Then, in Season 19's Who's Brian Now?, the show goes even further. Peter casually mentions that Chris doesn't remember we stole him from a Dutch family. Not adopted, stolen. From a Dutch family, this is presented as just another throwaway gag, with Peter saying it like it's no big deal that they kidnapped a baby from another country. The elephant child mystery. Despite all these contradictory adoption and kidnapping theories, there's actual visual evidence that Lois gave birth to Chris. In the episode He's Too Sexy for His Fat, the family looks at an old newspaper clipping about Chris's birth. The headline calls him an elephant child because he was absolutely massive as a newborn. The article includes a photo of baby Chris, who appears to weigh about as much as a refrigerator. This giant baby story comes up again in other episodes. Characters reference how huge Chris was at birth and how difficult the delivery must have been for Lois. If Chris was adopted or stolen from a Dutch family, why would there be newspaper coverage of his birth? Why would anyone remember Lois struggling through labor with him? The evidence doesn't add up. Season 16's Don't Be a Dickens at Christmas adds another layer to Chris's birth story. In this episode, it's revealed that Chris actually had a twin brother who didn't survive childbirth. Lois had planned to name the baby Timos, so that together the boys' names would spell Christmas, Chris plus Timos. This is an incredibly dark reveal that the show treats as just another joke, but it completely confirms that Lois gave birth to Chris, or at least to one Chris-sized baby and one Timos-sized baby. How Family Guy treats continuity. The real answer to all these contradictions is that Family Guy simply doesn't care about continuity. The show operates on cartoon logic where anything can be retconned, ignored, or contradicted depending on what joke the writers want to make that week. Peter has had dozens of different jobs. Characters have died and come back to life. Events from one episode are completely forgotten by the next. Seth MacFarlane, the creator of Family Guy, has said in interviews that the show prioritizes comedy over continuity. If rewriting a character's backstory makes for a funny joke, they'll do it without worrying about what they established 5 seasons ago. This is why we can have an episode showing Chris as a massive newborn, and then another episode claiming he was stolen from Holland, and the show expects us to just roll with both versions. The same philosophy applies to Meg's parentage. The Stan Thompson joke worked in Screwed the Pooch, because it added to Meg's character as someone who is constantly overlooked and mistreated by her family. The fact that everyone knew about her real father except her is perfectly on brand for how the Griffins treat Meg. But following up on that storyline would require actual plot development, and Family Guy has never been interested in that kind of storytelling. The Stewie baby theory. Stewie's paternity question came up in season 9's And I'm Joyce Kinney, one of the show's more memorable episodes. The plot centers on Lois befriending a new news anchor named Joyce Kinney, who then betrays her by revealing on live TV that Lois starred in a graphic film back in college. The film was called Quest for Fur, a parody of Quest for Fire, and it featured Lois as a cave woman in what appears to be a very low-budget adult production. When the Griffin family watches the porno together, because of course they do, Stewie starts to panic. He notices that one of the male actors in the film, specifically a pizza delivery guy who shows up despite the movie being set in caveman times, has the exact same football-shaped head that Stewie has. The actor even sounds like Stewie. This leads Stewie to develop a theory that he's a porn baby, conceived during the filming of Quest for Fur, rather than being Peter's biological son. The show plays this for laughs, with Stewie becoming increasingly anxious about his origins. He sees this adult actor who looks exactly like what he might look like as a grown man, and jumps to the conclusion that this must be his real father. The visual similarity between baby Stewie and the porn actor is definitely intentional. The animators gave them the same distinctive head shape that no other character in the show has. Why the Stewie theory makes no sense. Here's the problem with Stewie being conceived during Quest for Fur. Basic timeline math. Lois made the porno film in college back in the early 1980 seconds, before she ever met Peter. The movie explicitly states this. Lois needed money for tuition after her wealthy parents cut her off, so she turned to adult films as a way to pay for school. This all happened years before she married Peter and started having kids. Stewie is the youngest Griffin child, Meg is the oldest, then Chris, then Stewie. For Stewie to have been conceived during the filming of Quest for Fur, he would have had to be born before Meg and Chris, which makes no sense. Stewie was born after Peter and Lois had been married for several years and had already raised 2 other children. The timeline just doesn't work. Even the show itself acknowledges this plot hole. On the IMDb Goofs page for And I'm Joyce Kinney, users point out that Stewie worrying about being a porn baby is impossible, given that he's the youngest child. The entire storyline is built on a logical impossibility that the writers either didn't notice or didn't care about because it made for funny scenes of Stewie freaking out. Peter is definitely Stewie's dad. Unlike Meg and Chris, where the show at least throws out alternative paternity theories, even if they're jokes, Stewie's parentage has been firmly established multiple times. The show, Stewie Griffin, The Untold Story, focuses heavily on Stewie's conception and includes flashbacks to Peter and Lois creating him. There are no hints of anyone else being involved. More importantly, Stewie has a half-brother named Bertram who serves as his nemesis throughout several episodes. Bertram was conceived from one of Peter's sperm donations and becomes Stewie's rival. The entire dynamic between Stewie and Bertram is built on them being half-brothers who share Peter as their father. If Peter wasn't Stewie's biological dad, the Bertram storyline would make 0 sense. The show has also done multiple episodes about Stewie's conception, specifically with Peter as the father. Chap Stewie, from season 12, involves Stewie learning about his conception and dealing with the psychological implications of his origins. These episodes treat Peter's paternity as an established fact, not as something questionable, the real reason for these theories. So, why does Family Guy keep throwing out hints that Peter might not be the biological father of his children? It's simple. The joke is funny. The idea that Peter is raising 3 kids who aren't actually his fits perfectly with the show's sense of humor. Peter is portrayed as an incompetent father who often forgets his kids exist or actively works against their interests. Finding out they're not biologically his would almost be a relief for everyone involved. For Meg specifically, the Stan Thompson joke serves a narrative purpose. Meg is the family punching bag, constantly ignored and mistreated by everyone around her. The revelation that her real father is some guy named Stan Thompson, and that everyone in the family knows except her, is peak Meg suffering. It's tragic and absurd in exactly the way Family Guy likes to treat Meg's character. The Chris kidnapping and adoption jokes work because Chris is portrayed as simple and easygoing. He's the kind of character who probably wouldn't question being told he was stolen from a Dutch family as a baby. He'd just accept it and move on with his day. The jokes about Chris's origins play into his characterization as someone who doesn't overthink things. What the show has actually confirmed. If we strip away all the jokes, gags, and throwaway lines, what does Family Guy actually establish as canon about the Griffin kids' parentage? The most consistent answer is that Peter and Lois are the biological parents of all 3 children, with some major asterisks. Chris was conceived when a condom broke, leading to an unwanted pregnancy that Peter and Lois eventually accepted. He was born as an unusually large baby, the elephant child, possibly with a twin who didn't survive. Despite jokes about adoption and kidnapping, the visual evidence and multiple episodes show that Lois gave birth to Chris. Stewie is definitively Peter and Lois's biological child. Multiple episodes center on his conception and birth, and his relationship with his half-brother Bertram confirms Peter's paternity. The quest for fur porn baby theory is just Stewie's anxiety talking, based on a timeline that doesn't actually work. Meg is the only one where the show leaves genuine ambiguity. The Stan Thompson reveal in Screwed the Pooch has never been explicitly contradicted or confirmed. Brian said it with confidence, Peter didn't deny it, and the name has popped up occasionally in fan discussions ever since. Whether it's meant to be taken seriously or as just another joke at Meg's expense remains unclear. Why continuity doesn't matter in Quahog. Family Guy exists in a universe where logic takes a backseat to comedy. Characters can die and come back. Peter can have a new job every episode. The Griffin house can be destroyed and rebuilt between scenes. In this kind of show, worrying about who fathered which child feels almost beside the point. The beauty of Family Guy's approach is that every version of events can be true simultaneously in their own way. Chris was born naturally and adopted and stolen from a Dutch family. Stewie is Peter's son and the result of Lois's porn career. Meg's father is Peter and Stan Thompson. The show operates on dream logic where contradictions don't need resolution. This approach frustrates viewers who want clear answers and consistent world building, but it frees the writers to make whatever jokes they want without being bound by past episodes. For a show that's been on the air for over 20 years and has produced more than 400 episodes, this flexibility has probably been essential to staying fresh and avoiding the creative constraints that kill other long-running series. The paternity questions surrounding the Griffin children ultimately serve the comedy rather than the plot. They're not meant to be solved or taken seriously. They're just another tool in the show's arsenal for generating laughs, usually at the expense of the kids themselves. And in true Family Guy fashion, that's probably exactly how Peter would want it. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the theory that Stewie funds the family through secret modeling. Stewie funds the family through secret modeling, the hidden money source theory. The Calvin Klein discovery. At the end of season 2's A Picture is Worth $1,000, something significant happens that the show immediately forgets about. The Griffin family is in New York City, walking out after Chris's failed art career has crashed and burned. They're heading back to Rhode Island with nothing to show for their trip. Then, Calvin Klein himself spots them on the street. Klein approaches the family, and his eyes lock onto Stewie. He tells them he must have Stewie as a model for his new line of designer diapers. Peter asks who this guy is, showing his usual lack of awareness about famous people. Brian has to explain that Klein is a fashion designer, making a joke about distinguishing him from other male fashion designers by noting he's actually straight. The episode ends with Stewie's image plastered across a massive outdoor advertisement screen in Times Square. He's modeling Calvin Klein's new brand of diapers, his baby face and football-shaped head displayed for millions of people to see. It's a legitimate modeling gig with one of the biggest fashion designers in the world. This isn't some small local campaign. Stewie is on billboards in the most famous advertising space on the planet. The episode that changes everything. A Picture is Worth $1,000 aired on the 18th of April 2000 during Family Guy's second season. The episode follows Peter's midlife crisis about not leaving behind a legacy after running into a former classmate who owns an amusement park. Peter discovers that Chris has artistic talent when an art dealer spots one of Chris's paintings being used as a car window replacement and offers to buy it. The family travels to New York so Chris can become a famous artist under the guidance of Antonio Monati, a controlling art dealer who completely transforms Chris into Christabel. Chris gets a makeover, green hair, fashionable clothes, and an introduction to Kate Moss. But when Chris's big art show reveals paintings of Peter in an Andy Warhol style, the art world rejects him as a fraud, and the family prepares to go home. That's when Calvin Klein enters the picture. The Calvin Klein scene happens in the final moments of the episode, right before the credits roll. It's treated as a throwaway joke, a funny button to end the episode. But unlike most Family Guy jokes, this one has real implications. Stewie didn't just pose for one photo, he became the face of an entire product line for a major fashion brand. What canon actually shows us? Here's where we need to separate fact from theory. What the show actually establishes is very limited. We see Calvin Klein approach the family and cast Stewie. We see Stewie's face on a Times Square billboard advertising Calvin Klein diapers. That's it. That's all the canon evidence we have. After this episode, the show never mentions Stewie's modeling career again. Not once. In over 400 episodes spanning more than 2 decades, there is no reference to Stewie working for Calvin Klein, earning modeling money, or having any connection to the fashion industry. The episode treats it as a one-time gag with no lasting consequences. This is completely normal for Family Guy. The show operates on negative continuity, where events from one episode rarely affect future episodes. Characters die and come back. Major life changes happen and are forgotten by next week. Peter has had dozens of different jobs that disappear without explanation. The show prioritizes comedy over continuity, so Stewie's modeling career getting dropped isn't unusual, it's standard operating procedure. The Griffin family's money mystery. Despite the lack of follow-up on Stewie's modeling, the show does consistently establish one thing: the Griffins have serious financial problems. Multiple episodes directly address their money troubles. They're portrayed as a working-class family struggling to make ends meet, even though Peter constantly spends money on ridiculous schemes. In Mission Impossible from Season 3, Lois and Chris look at family photos together. Chris points out, "The broken condom that led to my birth," and Lois responds, "And the lawsuit that followed bought us this house. You're our favorite mistake." This establishes that the Griffins bought their house with settlement money from suing a condom company, not through savings or traditional income. Season 10's Lottery Fever explicitly shows the family living on a strict budget before Peter buys lottery tickets. When Peter wins, he admits he took out a second mortgage on the house just to buy thousands of lottery tickets. This reveals that the family was in such bad financial shape that Peter felt desperate enough to risk their home. After winning, Peter wastes all the money on gold architecture, expensive cars, and forcing his friends to do humiliating tasks for his entertainment. By the end of the episode, they're broke again and back to being a lower middle-class family. In Peter Griffin, Husband, Father, Brother, from Season 5, Peter demands reparations from Carter Pewterschmidt after discovering his family had black ancestry, who were enslaved by the Pewterschmidt family. Carter gives Peter $20,000 to never mention it again. What does Peter do with this windfall? He converts their living room into a replica of Pee-wee's Playhouse, wasting the entire amount on a single ridiculous home renovation project. Peter's spending problem. The show repeatedly demonstrates that Peter has zero financial responsibility. He spends money impulsively on whatever entertains him in the moment, with no thought for his family's needs or long-term security. This character trait appears in countless episodes across all seasons. Peter has owned multiple boats, despite having no practical need for them. He's started numerous businesses that immediately fail. He's bought expensive equipment for hobbies he abandons within days. He's traveled on expensive trips on a whim. He's made major purchases like vehicles and home renovations without consulting Lois. Every time the family gets money from any source, Peter finds a way to waste it. The show has even directly addressed this trait. In Seahorse Seashell Party from season 10, Meg finally stands up to the family and calls Peter out. She tells him, "You have no education, you have no interests, you just do whatever reckless thing you want to do, whenever you want to do it, without regard for anyone else." She points out that when he's not terrorizing the community with impulsive escapades, he's being a total jerk to his family. TV Tropes describes Peter as the hedonist, noting that while extreme examples are usually in Cutaways, he tends to spend money on whatever will entertain him, even to the detriment of those around him. Later episodes have explicitly stated that the family's finances are shaky because of Peter's behavior. Where does their money actually come from? The show has established several legitimate income sources for the Griffin family over the years, though none fully explain how they afford their lifestyle. Peter has worked at the Pawtucket Brewery for most of the series, though he's been fired and rehired multiple times. This would provide a steady working-class income, but not enough to support a family of 5 with constant financial emergencies and Peter's wasteful spending. Lois comes from the wealthy Pewterschmidt family. Her father, Carter, is a billionaire who owns multiple businesses. While Carter generally disapproves of Peter and doesn't regularly support them financially, he occasionally helps out in crisis situations. The show has hinted that Lois might have some trust fund or family money, but this is never clearly established as an ongoing income source. Brian occasionally works various jobs, from writing, which pays terribly, to working at hardware stores, to temporary gigs. Chris and Meg have had part-time jobs at various points, but none of these would add enough to the family income to explain their financial situation, especially given how often Peter quits jobs or gets fired. The show also implies that being characters on a TV show might itself be a source of income. In later seasons, Family Guy has made meta jokes suggesting the characters are aware they're in an animated sitcom. Some episodes hint that they get paid for appearing on the show, which would be an additional income stream beyond their in-universe jobs. But this is played more for comedy than as a serious explanation of their finances. The theory: Stewie's secret modeling career. Here's where we move from established canon into fan theory territory. The theory goes like this: Stewie's modeling career didn't actually end after "A Picture is Worth $1,000. He continued working for Calvin Klein and possibly other brands, earning significant money. However, Peter discovered this income source and has been secretly taking Stewie's earnings to fund his own nonsense ever since. This theory would explain several ongoing mysteries about the Griffin family's finances. They live in a decent house in what appears to be a middle-class neighborhood. They own a car, they can afford to eat regularly, and have utilities. Yet Peter constantly quits jobs, gets fired, or wastes large sums of money on schemes. How do they survive? Secret modeling income from Stewie could be the answer. The theory suggests that Peter, being the selfish and irresponsible father he is, simply takes the modeling checks that come for Stewie and spends them however he wants. Stewie, despite being a genius baby, might not have legal control over his own earnings. In the real world, child actors' parents control their income, often with disastrous results. The same could apply to child models, even genius baby ones. This would explain why the show never mentions Stewie's modeling again. It's not that it stopped, it's that it became a secret source of income that the family doesn't talk about. The modeling work continues off-screen, generating regular paychecks that Peter intercepts and wastes. Meanwhile, Stewie focuses on his plans for world domination and his friendship with Brian, unaware or unconcerned that his father is stealing from him. Problems with the theory. While this theory is creative and would explain some inconsistencies, it has significant problems when examined against what the show actually presents. The biggest issue is that Family Guy never hints at this arrangement, even once. Not a single episode, cutaway gag, or throwaway line suggests Stewie continues modeling or that Peter is taking his earnings. Family Guy isn't subtle about its running gags. When something is meant to be an ongoing element, the show references it repeatedly. Peter's fights with the giant chicken appear across multiple seasons. Stewie's relationship with Brian is a constant thread. The show's meta humor about being canceled and brought back gets mentioned regularly. If Stewie's modeling was meant to be an ongoing income source, the show would have made at least one joke about it in over 20 years. The show also contradicts this theory by showing the Griffins genuinely struggling with money. In Lottery Fever, they're on a strict budget before winning. In various episodes, they can't afford medical bills, home repairs, or other expenses. If Peter had access to regular modeling income from Stewie, these financial crises wouldn't happen. Unless Peter is somehow spending every single dollar of Stewie's earnings immediately, there should be some financial cushion. Additionally, Stewie's character development makes this theory unlikely. As the series has progressed, Stewie has become less focused on world domination and more on his relationship with Brian and his own personal projects. He's shown to be extremely protective of Rupert, his teddy bear, and aware of his own interests. It seems unlikely that he would let Peter steal his earnings without some kind of revenge plot or confrontation. Based purely on what the show establishes, here's what we know for certain. Stewie was cast by Calvin Klein to model diapers at the end of A Picture Is Worth $1,000. His image appeared on a Times Square billboard. The show never references this modeling career again in any subsequent episode. The Griffin family has ongoing financial struggles despite Peter's frequent wasteful spending on ridiculous schemes and projects. The theory that Stewie secretly continues modeling and Peter steals his earnings is speculation, not canon. It's a fan explanation for the show's financial inconsistencies, but it's not supported by any actual evidence from the episodes. The real explanation for the Griffin family's finances is simpler and more boring. Family Guy doesn't care about continuity, and the writers make up whatever they need for each individual episode's plot. The show operates on cartoon logic, where consequences don't carry over between episodes. The Griffins are as rich or as poor as the current story requires them to be. Sometimes they're desperate for money, sometimes they casually spend thousands on Peter's whims, and the show expects viewers to accept these contradictions as part of its comedic style. Stewie's modeling career was a one-episode joke that ended when the episode ended, just like countless other plot points throughout the series. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the theory that the Griffins are all TV actors. The Griffins are all TV actors, what Inside Family Guy actually shows. The episode that broke the fourth wall. On the 23rd of October 2016, Family Guy aired an episode unlike anything the show had done before. Season 15, Episode 4, titled Inside Family Guy, took viewers behind the scenes of the show itself. The episode was hosted by James Woods, the actor who voices himself as a recurring character on the series. Woods guided viewers through what was presented as a typical production week for Family Guy, showing the cast and crew at work making an episode. The episode opens with Woods explaining that for the first time ever, audiences would see what it's really like for the Griffin family, who not only live together but also star in a sitcom together. This setup immediately establishes the episode's central concept. The Griffins are actors who play fictionalized versions of themselves on a television show, also called Family Guy. How the episode presents the Griffins. In Inside Family Guy, each member of the Griffin family is shown as an actor with a life beyond the animated show. They give interviews talking about their experiences working on the series. They have dressing rooms on a studio lot. They attend table reads, where the cast sits together and reads through scripts for upcoming episodes. They interact with writers, producers, and network executives. Peter Griffin is shown as the difficult star of the show. He arrives late to work. He complains about scripts. He acts like a prima donna on set. The other cast members discuss Peter's behavior in their interviews, with Brian noting that Peter is hard to work with, though not as disgusting as Jim Belushi. He adds, Lois Griffin talks about the challenges of being married to Peter, both in the show and in real life, since they play a married couple on screen and are apparently actually married off screen as well. She discusses discovering inappropriate photos on Peter's phone and the complicated excuses he gave involving the cloud and Apple's photo system. Stewie Griffin, voiced by the show's creator Seth MacFarlane, appears in interviews discussing the production. In one scene, Stewie calls the show awful, expressing frustration with how it's written. The episode reveals that Stewie speaks in his regular British accent even when not filming scenes, suggesting this is how the actor who plays Stewie actually talks. Chris, Meg, and Brian also appear as themselves, giving interviews and participating in the behind-the-scenes footage. The episode shows them in makeup chairs, walking around the studio lot, and interacting with each other between takes. The central plot, Peter, gets fired. The main storyline of Inside Family Guy follows Peter's removal from the show. the episode reveals that Peter becomes difficult to work with every Monday. He complains that the show isn't funny anymore, that every joke needs to be shocking or gross, and that he's sick of working on it. His behavior has gotten so bad that the writers and producers decide to fire him. To accomplish this, they write a fake script called "Peter Dies, We're Really Serious. No joke, he's dead, and never coming back." During the table read, where the cast gathers to read through the week's script together, Peter discovers that his character is being killed off. The script opens with Lois announcing that Peter has committed suicide. When Peter suggests they could use Stewie's time machine to undo this, a line from Stewie in the script immediately shuts down that possibility. When Peter says maybe it's all a dream, Chris has a line saying it's not. Peter tries to pitch alternatives but realizes the show is actually firing him. He goes to the producers to beg for a second chance. They agree to give him one more opportunity to redeem himself. However, Peter continues being difficult, and he's kicked off the show permanently. David Spade is brought in to replace him as a new character named Uncle Ricky. Life after getting fired. The episode follows Peter after his firing. He checks into the Chateau Marmont, a luxury hotel in Hollywood. He tries to get other acting work, auditioning for a Cheerios commercial where he would play a caring dad. When that doesn't work out, Peter runs out of money and gets evicted from his expensive hotel room. He moves into a rundown apartment and falls on hard times. Meanwhile, back at the Family Guy studio, the show continues production with David Spade. At first, Spade is a hit with the cast and crew. Everyone loves working with him because he's professional and easy to work with, the opposite of Peter. However, by the end of the week, Spade's charm has worn off, and people start missing Peter despite his difficult personality. Peter, determined to get his job back, goes to Fox Television Group headquarters and pitches a new show idea to the network executives Dana Walden and Gary Newman, who appear as themselves in the episode. His pitch is called Bumbler with a Tumbler. The network buys the show and gives Peter a 3-season order. However, after network notes and changes, the show airs as Bambler with a Fambler, which makes sense to nobody, but somehow gets renewed for a 3rd season anyway. Getting his own show gives Peter access back to the studio lot. The episode ends with Peter successfully returning to Family Guy, having learned nothing from his experience. David Spade is written off the show. The episode jokes that Spade is sent to replace Sofia Vergara on Modern Family after getting her deported. The Batman Gambit reveal. Near the end of the episode, a twist is revealed. The entire firing was actually planned by the writers and producers. They explain that Peter becomes a diva every Monday, so they've learned to work around this pattern. They write a fake script where Peter gets killed off, let him have his meltdown and leave, then shoot the real script on Friday when Peter comes crawling back asking for his job. This reveals that the whole behind-the-scenes documentary might itself be part of the show's fiction. The episode plays with multiple layers of reality, never making it entirely clear what's supposed to be real within this framework and what's part of the fictional Family Guy show within a show, what the episode actually establishes. Inside Family Guy presents the Griffin family as animated actors in several specific ways. The episode shows them having distinct personalities that are similar to but not identical to their on-screen characters. Peter is self-centered and difficult in real life, just as his character is self-centered and difficult in the show. Lois deals with Peter's behavior, both as his co-star and as his wife. The children navigate working with their parents while also being related to them. The episode reveals that the characters are aware they're on a television show. They discuss ratings, scripts, network executives, and production schedules. They reference previous episodes as things they've filmed. When Lois mentions the time they killed off Brian, she explains it was so he could work on a remake of Old Yeller, where the dog kills the boy instead of the other way around. The physical production of the show is depicted with some detail. There's a writer's room where the scripts are created. There's a sound stage where scenes are filmed. There are dressing rooms for each cast member decorated with memorabilia from their careers. Props and costumes from previous episodes are displayed around the studio, including Stewie's ray gun, the Praetorian flag from E. Peterbus Unum, and Brian's banana costume from another episode. The meta-fictional format. Inside Family Guy follows a format that other animated sitcoms have used before. The episode is most directly comparable to The Simpsons' Behind the Laughter from season 11, which presented the Simpson family as actors in a behind-the-scenes documentary format. That episode showed the Simpsons giving interviews, discussing the show's production, and revealing conflicts between cast members. The difference is that Behind the Laughter was presented as a VH1 Behind the Music style documentary, complete with a narrator and talking head interviews. Inside Family Guy uses James Woods as a host who walks through the studio and introduces different segments. Woods occasionally breaks the fourth wall by addressing the camera directly and making jokes about his own controversial real-life behavior. The meta-fictional format allows the episode to make jokes about the actual production of Family Guy. The writers joke about how the show's cutaway gags are enjoyed by nobody except the studio ostrich. Characters complain about how the show prioritizes shocking and gross humor. Glenn Quagmire, who found Jesus and became religious in his backstory, asks if they could just once tell a joke that brings glory to God. Does this mean the Griffins are always actors? The key question is whether Inside Family Guy establishes that the Griffins are actors in all episodes, or if this is just a one-time metafictional episode. The evidence suggests it's the latter. This is what TV Tropes calls a formula-breaking episode, an installment that deliberately breaks from the show's normal format to do something experimental or different. After Inside Family Guy aired, subsequent episodes of Family Guy returned to the normal format. The Griffins were shown living their lives in Quahog, Rhode Island, with no reference to them being actors or filming a show. Peter went back to working at the Pawtucket Brewery. The family dealt with various sitcom plots. There was no acknowledgement that they were performing for cameras or that any of the events were scripted. Family Guy has done other episodes that play with the show's format and fourth wall. The Simpsons Guy was a crossover with The Simpsons. Various Road to episodes feature Brian and Stewie traveling to alternate universes. Several episodes have ended with the characters directly addressing the audience. But none of these format-breaking episodes permanently change how the show operates. The show has also made meta-jokes about being a television series in various episodes beyond Inside Family Guy. Characters occasionally reference being on a show, mention ratings, or break the fourth wall. But these moments are treated as jokes rather than as establishing a consistent reality where the Griffins are actors. Why the episode works as comedy. Inside Family Guy succeeds as an episode because it lets the show mock itself. By presenting the Griffins as actors, the episode can make jokes about Family Guy's actual production, writing process, and reputation. The writers can criticize their own show through the characters' complaints while still making those complaints funny. The episode pokes fun at how network television works. Peter's pitch getting picked up for 3 seasons despite making no sense satirizes how networks greenlight shows. The network notes that transform Bumbler with a Tumbler into Bambler with a Fambler mock how executive interference ruins creative projects. The ease with which David Spade joins and then leaves the cast jokes about how disposable actors can be in television. The documentary format also allows for visual comedy that wouldn't work in a normal episode. Seeing the Griffins walk around a studio lot feels surreal. Watching them sit at a table, read, and react to a script is inherently funny because it acknowledges the artificiality of their existence. The contrast between their animated appearance and the realistic setting of a television studio creates humor through cognitive dissonance. What fans think this means? Some Family Guy fans have latched on to Inside Family Guy as proof that the entire series takes place within a fictional show within a show. According to this interpretation, every episode of Family Guy is actually the Griffins performing scripted stories for their television show. This would explain why the show has no continuity. They're just filming different episodes, not living through connected events. It would explain why characters die and come back. They're actors who get written out and then return. It would explain fourth wall breaks. The characters are aware they're performing. However, this interpretation requires treating one metafictional episode as more important than the other 400+ episodes of the series. Inside Family Guy is clearly labeled as a special behind-the-scenes episode. James Woods introduces it as something different from a normal installment. The format is completely unlike every other episode. Taking it as establishing permanent canon would be like watching a blooper reel and concluding that all movies take place on film sets. The more reasonable interpretation is that Inside Family Guy is a one-off experiment. It's a special episode that plays with the show's format for comedy but doesn't fundamentally change what Family Guy is. The Griffins are actors for the duration of this one episode, then go back to being characters in all other episodes. Similar episodes in other shows Many long-running animated sitcoms have done metafictional episodes. The Simpsons' Behind the Laughter has already been mentioned. South Park did Cartoon Wars and 200 over 201, which featured the South Park characters dealing with censorship and network pressure. BoJack Horseman made meta-commentary part of its core storytelling, frequently showing BoJack as an actor on his in-universe show, Horsin' Around. These episodes work because they let shows comment on themselves. They can address criticisms, poke fun at their own weaknesses, and acknowledge the artificiality of television, but they're typically treated as special events rather than as revealing the true nature of the show. When The Simpsons returned after Behind the Laughter, the family wasn't still pretending to be actors. They were back to being the Simpson family. Inside Family Guy fits into this tradition. It's a clever episode that uses the behind-the-scenes format for comedy. It provides commentary on how Family Guy works and what it's like to produce an animated sitcom, but it's not meant to recontextualize every other episode of the series. It's a fun experiment, not a permanent change to the show's reality. The episode's legacy. Inside Family Guy aired once during season 15 and hasn't been directly referenced since. Later episodes haven't shown the Griffins as actors or mentioned that they film a television show. The episode stands alone as a unique installment in the series, remembered by fans but not integrated into ongoing continuity. The episode did fairly well with viewers, though it wasn't one of the highest-rated episodes of the season. Reviews were mixed. Some viewers enjoyed the meta-humor and behind-the-scenes format. Others found it boring or felt it broke the show's immersion too much. The episode has a 6.7 rating on IMDb, which is slightly below average for Family Guy. The episode is most often compared to similar metafictional episodes from other shows, particularly Behind the Laughter from The Simpsons. Fans who enjoy experimental episodes and fourth-wall breaking tend to like Inside Family Guy. Fans who prefer traditional storytelling often skip it on rewatches. So does Inside Family Guy prove that the Griffins are all TV actors? Within that specific episode, yes, they are explicitly shown as actors who work on a television show. For that one episode, the format of Family Guy is a behind-the-scenes documentary about animated actors. Does this episode establish that the Griffins are actors in all episodes of Family Guy? No. This is a one-time format-breaking episode that returns to normal afterward. The show has never referenced this episode's framing device in subsequent installments. The Griffins go back to being characters living in Quahog rather than actors filming a show. The episode is best understood as a metafictional comedy experiment rather than as revealing secret truth about the series. It's Family Guy commenting on itself, making jokes about television production, and having fun with a documentary format. It's not meant to be taken as literal truth that applies to every other episode. Like many comedy shows, Family Guy occasionally breaks its own reality for the sake of a joke or an experimental episode, then returns to normal afterward. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the theory that Carter Pewterschmidt hid the cure for cancer for profit. The most evil thing Family Guy ever made canon. The episode that revealed a monstrous secret. On the 4th of November 2012, Family Guy aired an episode that would permanently establish Carter Pewterschmidt as one of the most evil characters in the show's history. Season 11, Episode 3, titled The Old Man and the Big C, revealed something shocking. Carter's pharmaceutical company discovered a cure for cancer in 1999, and he deliberately kept it hidden from the world to maximize his profits from cancer treatment drugs. This isn't a fan theory or an interpretation of subtle hints. This actually happens in the episode. Carter explicitly admits to hiding the cure for cancer. He uses it to cure himself when he gets cancer. And when confronted by his own daughter about releasing it to save millions of lives, he promises to do so, then lies, and keeps it secret anyway. The episode ends with Carter facing no consequences for condemning countless people to death for profit. How? The episode starts. Quagmire's hair. The Old Man and the Big C begins with a subplot about Glenn Quagmire that seems completely unrelated to cancer at first. The guys attend a baseball game together, and Quagmire goes for a fly ball in the stands. When he catches it, his toupee falls off his head, revealing that Quagmire is completely bald underneath his hair. This comes as a shock to viewers who had no idea Quagmire wore a wig. For 11 seasons, the show never hinted that his hair wasn't real. The revelation happened suddenly and without warning. Quagmire becomes a laughingstock at the game when everyone sees his bald head. People point and laugh at him. The experience humiliates Quagmire so much that he decides to stop wearing his toupee entirely. However, going bald changes his whole personality. Without his hair, Quagmire starts acting like an old man. His attitude shifts. His confidence disappears. He becomes bitter and cranky. Peter, Joe, and Cleveland notice that hanging out with Quagmire isn't fun anymore when he's acting elderly. The guys convince Quagmire to get a hair transplant to restore his youth and personality. This decision leads them to the hospital, which is where the main plot of the episode begins. While Quagmire undergoes his hair transplant procedure, Brian wanders off through the hospital corridors. That's when he overhears something that changes everything. Brian discovers Carter's cancer. While walking through the hospital, Brian overhears doctors talking about a patient with terminal cancer. He catches enough of the conversation to realize they're discussing Carter Pewterschmidt, Lois's father. Brian is shocked by this news. Carter is wealthy, powerful, and seems invincible. The idea that he has terminal cancer seems impossible. Brian tells Stewie what he heard. Stewie decides to verify this information using technology. He hacks into the security cameras at the Pewterschmidt mansion to see if Carter is sick. The footage confirms that Carter appears to have cancer. He looks ill in the camera feeds. Everything seems to support what Brian overheard. Brian feels obligated to tell Lois that her father is dying. When he breaks the news to her, Lois is devastated. She immediately gathers the entire Griffin family, Peter, Meg, Chris, Stewie, and Brian, and rushes to her parents' house to see Carter before it's too late. The family drives to the Pewterschmidt estate, expecting to find Carter on his deathbed. But when they arrive at the mansion, they find Carter in perfect health. He's not sick at all. He's walking around, acting completely normal, showing no signs of illness whatsoever. The family is confused. Lois is relieved but also angry at Brian for giving her false information. Brian loses all credibility with the family for getting them worked up over nothing. Brian's imposter theory. Brian can't shake the feeling that something is wrong. He's certain he heard the doctors correctly. They specifically mentioned Carter Pewterschmidt and terminal cancer. Brian becomes convinced that the healthy Carter they saw at the mansion must be an imposter. He theorizes that the real Carter died, and someone is pretending to be him to protect the Pewterschmidt business empire. This theory actually makes some sense in the context of Family Guy's world, where ridiculous conspiracies sometimes turn out to be true. Brian manages to convince Stewie to help him prove his imposter theory. The two of them begin following Carter around, spying on him, and looking for proof that he's not the real Carter Pewterschmidt. They tail him to various locations. They watch him through binoculars. They sneak around trying to catch him doing something that would reveal he's a fake. Brian and Stewie are convinced they're about to expose a massive conspiracy. They expect to find evidence that someone murdered the real Carter and replaced him with a look-alike. What they discover is far worse than an imposter scheme: the truth about the cure. While following Carter, Brian and Stewie witness something that changes everything. They see Carter entering a secure facility that's part of his pharmaceutical company. Inside, they discover that Carter does have cancer, just like the doctors said, but they also discover why he appears healthy despite having terminal cancer. Carter has access to a cure for cancer, not a treatment that manages the disease or extends life for a while, an actual cure that completely eliminates cancer from the body. Carter has been using this cure on himself, which is why he looks healthy despite having been diagnosed with terminal cancer. Brian and Stewie are stunned by this revelation. A cure for cancer would be the most important medical discovery in human history. It would save millions of lives every year. Cancer kills more than 500,000 people annually in the United States alone, and nearly 10 million people worldwide. A cure would be worth more than any amount of money, and would earn its discoverer eternal fame and gratitude. But Carter isn't using this cure to help anyone except himself. Carter's confession. When Brian and Stewie confront Carter about the cancer cure, he doesn't deny it. He openly admits what he's doing. Carter explains that his pharmaceutical company discovered the cure for cancer back in 1999, the same year Family Guy premiered, which the show points out as an ironic detail. Carter reveals his reasoning for hiding the cure. He tells them that there's far more money to be made in treating cancer than in curing it. Cancer treatment is a massive industry worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Patients undergo chemotherapy, radiation, surgery, and various drug treatments over months or years. Insurance companies and patients pay enormous sums for these treatments. Pharmaceutical companies profit from selling the drugs used in ongoing cancer treatment. If Carter released the cure, all that revenue would disappear. Patients would take the cure once and be done. No more chemotherapy, no more ongoing treatment, no more steady stream of profit from selling cancer drugs. Carter prioritizes his company's financial interests over human lives. He's willing to let millions of people suffer and die from cancer so his pharmaceutical company can continue making money from treatment drugs. After explaining his logic, Carter throws Brian and Stewie out of his facility. He makes it clear that he has no intention of releasing the cure to the public. He'll continue using it on himself while everyone else dies from a disease that he could eliminate. Stewie steals the cure. As Brian and Stewie leave Carter's facility, Brian is furious. He rants about Carter's evil and how they need to expose him, but Stewie stays quiet. Finally, Stewie reveals that while Carter was distracted, Stewie stole a sample of the cancer cure. They have proof of what Carter has been hiding. Brian and Stewie take the cure back to the Griffin house. They plan to show it to Lois so she can convince her father to do the right thing. They believe that once Lois knows the truth, she'll be able to pressure Carter into releasing the cure to the world. However, before they can explain everything to Lois, Carter arrives at the Griffin house. He tracked them there to recover his stolen property. Carter demands that they return the cure. Brian refuses and finally tells Lois what they discovered, that her father has been hiding a cure for cancer since 1999. Lois confronts her father. Lois is absolutely appalled when she learns what her father has done. She can't believe that Carter would be so heartless and greedy. Lois knows people who have died from cancer. Everyone does. The idea that all those deaths could have been prevented if Carter had simply released the cure is too horrible to accept. She confronts Carter about his actions. She begs him to think about all the people suffering from cancer. She pleads with him to consider the millions of lives he could save. Lois tries to appeal to whatever humanity might exist in her father. Carter refuses to show any pity or remorse. He stands firm in his decision. The cancer cure will remain secret. His profits are more important than human lives. He shows no guilt whatsoever about condemning people to death from a curable disease. Lois continues pushing her father. She tries a different approach. She starts naming people close to Carter who could potentially get cancer and die because he's hiding the cure. She brings up his closest loved ones. She asks him to imagine Barbara, his wife, getting cancer. She mentions other family members and friends who could suffer. This emotional appeal seems to work. Carter's resolve finally cracks. He tells Lois that she's right. He promises to release the cure for cancer to the public. He says he'll hold a press conference and announce the discovery. The cure will be made available to everyone who needs it. Lois is relieved. The family celebrates. They believe they've convinced Carter to do the right thing. Lives will be saved. Carter will go down in history as the man who cured cancer, even if he waited too long to do it. Carter's lie. The next day, Carter holds his promised press conference. News cameras and reporters gather to hear his announcement. The family watches, expecting to hear Carter reveal the cancer cure to the world. This should be one of the most important medical announcements in history. Instead, Carter announces a new deodorant. That's it. No cancer cure, no life-saving medical breakthrough, just a deodorant product from his company. Carter completely lied to Lois about releasing the cure. He never had any intention of keeping his promise. Lois immediately calls her father to demand an explanation. Why didn't he announce the cancer cure like he promised? Carter's response is blunt and simple. He lied. He told Lois what she wanted to hear to get her off his back, but he never planned to actually release the cure. He's keeping it secret, just like before. The cancer cure remains hidden. Millions of people continue dying from a disease that Carter could eliminate with a single announcement. He cured himself while letting everyone else suffer and die. And he faces no consequences for this decision. Peter's disturbing reassurance. The episode ends with Lois upset about her father's evil. Peter, trying to comfort his wife, assures her that they'll get over being mad at Carter once he appears on the cover of a magazine. Peter's reasoning is that seeing someone on a magazine cover makes people forget about their bad actions. Immediately after Peter says this, the episode shows Carter appearing on the cover of Forbes magazine. The family sees the magazine. Just like Peter predicted, they quickly forget about being angry at Carter. The episode ends with Carter facing absolutely no consequences for hiding the cure for cancer and lying to his own daughter about releasing it. This ending reinforces how easily people forgive the wealthy and powerful, even when they do unspeakably evil things. Carter gets to be celebrated in Forbes while continuing to let millions die for profit. The episode presents this as just how the world works. Why this episode is so dark? The Old Man and the Big C stands out as one of Family Guy's darkest episodes because it takes a conspiracy theory that exists in real life and makes it canon in the show. There are people who genuinely believe that pharmaceutical companies hide cures for diseases to protect their profits. This episode validates that conspiracy theory within the Family Guy universe. Most Family Guy episodes deal with absurd or fantastical situations, evil chickens that fight Peter, time travel adventures, alternate universes. These stories are clearly fictional and don't reflect reality. But hiding a cancer cure for profit is something that could theoretically happen in the real world, which makes Carter's actions feel more disturbing than typical cartoon villainy. The episode also gives Carter no redemption arc. He doesn't learn a lesson. He doesn't change his mind. He doesn't face justice. He successfully hides the cure, lies to his daughter, and continues profiting from cancer treatments while people die. The episode presents this as Carter winning. Evil triumphs completely. The real-world implications. By making Carter's actions canon, Family Guy establishes that, in their universe, millions of people have died unnecessarily from cancer since 1999. Every cancer death in the show's timeline after 1999 could have been prevented. The show regularly makes cancer jokes and references characters with cancer. All of those situations involve a disease that has a known cure that's being deliberately hidden. This creates a disturbing subtext for any future Family Guy episodes that deal with cancer. When characters face cancer diagnoses or make cancer jokes, viewers now know that in the show's universe, there's a billionaire deliberately letting them suffer for profit. Carter Pewterschmidt is personally responsible for countless deaths. The episode aired in 2012, meaning Carter had been hiding the cure for 13 years at that point. Think about how many people died from cancer between 1999 and 2012. In the United States alone, that's millions of deaths. Worldwide, it's tens of millions, all preventable if Carter had released the cure. Why Carter never faces consequences. The episode never addresses why Carter doesn't face legal or social consequences for his actions. In reality, if someone was caught hiding a cure for cancer, they would face massive lawsuits, criminal charges, public outrage, and probably vigilante justice. The pharmaceutical company would be destroyed, Carter would be ruined. But in the Family Guy universe, nothing happens to him. The episode suggests that Carter's wealth and power protect him from any consequences. The magazine cover at the end implies that the wealthy can commit any crime and still be celebrated by society. This cynical message is darker than most Family Guy episodes. The show also never revisits this plot point in future episodes. Later episodes show Carter appearing in various stories with no reference to him hiding the cancer cure. Characters don't treat him as a mass murderer. Lois doesn't cut ties with her father. The family still visits the Pewterschmidt mansion for holidays. Everyone just accepts that Carter did this horrible thing and moves on. Fan reactions to the episode. Many Family Guy fans found The Old Man and the Big C to be too dark, even for a show known for pushing boundaries. The idea that Carter is actively killing millions of people for profit crossed a line for some viewers. Making this a permanent part of the show's canon meant that Carter's evil would always be present in the background of future episodes. Some fans appreciated the episode's willingness to satirize pharmaceutical company greed. The show was making a statement about how companies prioritize profits over human welfare. By taking this critique to its extreme conclusion, literally hiding a cure for cancer, the episode highlighted real concerns about the pharmaceutical industry. Other fans simply found the episode depressing. Family Guy usually ends episodes with some kind of resolution or return to normal. The Old Man and the Big C ends with evil winning and nothing changing. Carter keeps the cure. People keep dying. Nobody stops him. The nihilistic ending left many viewers feeling unsatisfied. How this fits with Carter's character. Prior to this episode, Carter Pewterschmidt was already established as a selfish, greedy billionaire who cared more about money than people. He's treated Lois poorly throughout the series. He looks down on Peter for being working class. He's engaged in various unethical business practices in other episodes. But hiding the cancer cure takes Carter's villainy to a new level. Previous episodes showed him being a bad person in personal relationships and shady business deals. This episode reveals him as someone comfortable with mass death for profit. It's the difference between being a jerk and being genuinely monstrous. The episode tries to justify this escalation by pointing out that Carter prioritizes business over everything else. His whole identity revolves around wealth and power. Releasing the cancer cure would threaten his financial empire, so he refuses to do it. The show presents this as Carter being consistent with his established character, just taking it to its logical extreme. The episode's message about wealth and power. The Old Man and the Big C delivers a cynical message about how the wealthy operate in society. Carter represents the worst impulses of capitalism taken to their conclusion. He has something that could help humanity, but refuses to share it because doing so would hurt his profits. The episode suggests that this kind of thinking is normal among the ultra-wealthy. The magazine cover ending reinforces this message. Despite committing what amounts to crimes against humanity, Carter faces no consequences because he's rich and powerful. The media celebrates him. His family forgives him. Nothing changes. The episode implies that this is simply how the world works. The wealthy can do anything without facing real accountability. This darker, more cynical tone was becoming more common in Family Guy during season 11. The show was moving away from its earlier silliness and incorporating more biting social commentary. The Old Man and the Big C represents this shift by tackling pharmaceutical company greed in the most extreme way possible. The lasting impact on the show. Since this episode aired in 2012, Carter Pewterschmidt has appeared in many subsequent episodes. However, the show has never directly referenced the cancer cure plotline again. It exists as canon but isn't brought up in later stories. This creates a strange situation where viewers know Carter is hiding the cure, but characters act like they've forgotten about it. This selective memory is typical of Family Guy's approach to continuity. The show will reference past events when it's convenient for a joke, but ignore them when they don't fit the current story. The cancer cure exists in the show's history, but doesn't affect how characters interact with Carter going forward. For fans who remember The Old Man and the Big C, Carter's appearances in later episodes carry an extra layer of darkness. Every time he shows up at a family dinner or helps out with some scheme, viewers know he's simultaneously responsible for countless deaths. The show never addresses this contradiction. The Old Man and the Big C stands as one of Family Guy's most disturbing episodes because it makes something truly monstrous part of the show's permanent canon. Carter Pewterschmidt discovered a cure for cancer in 1999 and has deliberately kept it secret for over 2 decades, as of the current season, to protect pharmaceutical profits. He uses the cure on himself while millions die from a disease he could eliminate. This isn't speculation or fan theory. It happens explicitly in the episode. Carter admits to hiding the cure. He promises to release it, then lies. The episode ends with him facing no consequences. The show presents this as a permanent part of Carter's character and the Family Guy universe. Whether viewers see this as clever satire of pharmaceutical company greed or as too dark for a comedy show, the fact remains. In the Family Guy universe, Carter Pewterschmidt is responsible for more deaths than perhaps any other character in the show's history, and he's perfectly fine with it. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.